Dr. Reddy? Ready? Okay, I hereby call to order the March 21st, 2018 Palm Springs City Council meeting. Would everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. Please place your hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. City Clerk, please do the roll call.
Councilmember Holstedge.
Present.
Councilmember Coors.
Here.
Councilmember Middleton.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Present.
Mayor Moon.
Present. Okay, presentations. Dr. Reddy, do you have any presentations this evening?
Mr. Mayor, there are no presentations.
Okay, thank you. Next item, acceptance of the agenda. The City Council at this time will discuss the order of the agenda and may amend the order, add urgency items, note abstentions or no votes on consent calendar items, and request consent calendar items be removed for discussion. I would like to entertain a motion for acceptance of the agenda. Are there any items any council member would like removed from the consent calendars for separate discussion and or vote?
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, I didn't see who came on first. Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Roberts?
No, I'm moving approval.
Okay, wow.
Oh.
We need a second on this.
I'm sure Christy's got something she wants to
I
say.
have one, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I just have one Q.
Item 1QI. Okay, do we have a motion to accept the agenda as amended
Mayor,
with the following items pulled?
I would also like to request that item 1H, which is the approval of the nomination of the Palm Springs Airport Terminal Building to the National Register of Historic Places. What I'd ask is if that be moved to the second meeting in April, just because there was a procedural issue. The Airport Commission did want to take a look at this, so we'll schedule that for the next Airport Commission meeting, and Mr. Maruzzi has agreed to join us at that meeting to give the presentation, and then it'll come back here on April the 18th.
Okay, thank you. So do we have a motion to accept the agenda? I know we do, but agenda is amended with the following items pulled. Item 1Q and item 1H will be rescheduled to a date certain, the second meeting in April. Motion is made by Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, seconded by Councilmember Coors. Motion is on the floor.
Motion passes.
Speaker, testimony for public hearings will only be taken at the time of the hearing, and general public comments. No agenda items will be taken later in the meeting. We have one speaker. Okay, our one speaker is requested to speak is Aftab Dada.
To Senate Bill 905 regarding the extension of the hours for alcoholic beverages. I would like to see that our city be included. And the reason behind it is that if there are competitive cities that are going to be included, we need to make sure that we don't lose that edge against our competitive cities. So I hope you will consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dada. Any other speakers, Mr. Clerk? New world record, at least in the last couple of years. Okay, with that, we will close the public testimony for the first public council, the first one. City Council, sorry, wait a minute. They changed our buttons up here a little bit, so I'm trying to get myself adjusted here. We've changed that again. It's the weekly, it's a bi-monthly change in the software.
It would be appropriate to offer you a report of a closed session if that's acceptable.
Okay, sorry. Yes, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor And members of the council, pursuant to the notice closed session agenda, the city council did in fact address each and every existing litigation, exposure to litigation, initiation of litigation item in closed session. There was no reportable action taken on any of those matters. The city council did consider my evaluation in part, and to the best of my understanding, will continue to do so at the next meeting. And with respect to real property negotiations, we only had the opportunity to move forward with one of the noticed items. That was 342 through 344 North Palm Canyon Drive. We did not take up the other two real estate items that were noticed, and we did not have a conference with labor negotiator in closed session today. That completes my report as to closed session action. I do wish to report that pursuant to council authorization in a prior closed session, that we were able to settle the case of Masters versus Palm Springs. We did so with the council's authorization. The amount of the settlement was $75,000. The city did not, in settling the matter, acknowledge any liability or legal responsibility for any of the claimed damages, but the settlement was entered in lieu of the extremely high costs of litigation. That concludes my report with respect to that matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gutkin. Next item, City Council Subcommittee and City Manager's comments and reports. I'd like to kick this off. One, we had a very positive subcommittee meeting this week, and I'll start this off and let Mayor Pro Tem add to it. We had a meeting with the Crossley neighborhood on last Thursday, March the 17th, on the tamarisk trees along the golf course there. And it was a very positive meeting, and a number of the residents who live along the golf course attended, and some of the other residents from the Crossley neighborhood who don't live on the golf course. And the contractor for the removal of the trees was there, and also the golf course manager, and of course our city manager, our city attorney, and our assistant city manager. And we had a very good discussion with this on actually the process and how it would work. The city attorney presented and explained to the residents a couple of different waivers that needed to be done to allow these trees to be removed from the property. And there was a few questions. Those questions were answered, and we told people that we would start this after we received the waivers from the people along the golf course, and we asked people to get them in within 10 days. All the people who attended turned them in at that time, and a few others who weren't able to attend, we both sent them to them and delivered them to their homes. So everyone has them, and they are due in by the 27th. So at that point, we should be able to start planning when we're going to move these trees. So it was a very positive, very drama-free meeting. Anything else, Mayor Pro Tem?
I would only add that about this. Okay, I'm done.
Another thing I wanted to mention is in April, and I'm sure the Budget Committee may have something to say, we're going to be starting the budget. And by ordinance, I'm the head of the Finance Committee, and Councilmember Coors is on it with me, but there's also a Budget Committee that's going to be working, and we can't talk outside of here because of Brown Act. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. I wanted to make sure, since I was on the Budget Committee the past 2 years, but I'm not on it this year, Councilmember Middleton is instead. I wanted to mention a couple things. One, last year, Councilmember Coors and I requested a comprehensive list of all the scheduled maintenance on our city facilities that needs to be done. That's because we were quite aware of the fact that if we look around the city, everything from City Hall to the Village Green, to the library, to the police stations, to the fire stations, we have so many city buildings, and there's a lot of maintenance that has been sort of deferred on those for a number of years and needs to be addressed in a priority manner. So what the city has done is done a study, 195 pages, which is very comprehensive, and it gives the total of the requirement forecast for 20 years. Thing is that that requirement forecast for 20 years is $269 million. And of that, 98 million is the airport, which comes mostly from the FAA. I talked to Dr. Reddy about this, mostly from the FAA, and the airport, of course, is its own enterprise fund. So that's 98 million of it, and 3 million is the wastewater treatment plant. But that still leaves $168 million at least of maintenance, and it needs to be done over 20 years. And that does not, and that means $8.4 million a year that needs to be done. And that does not include things such as the downtown park, I mean, the underground parking place, because that's taken out of Measure J now. And there's some other things that aren't included here. But if you add that to the fact that we also have $162 million in unfunded pension liability and $44 million in OPEB, which is other personnel employment benefits, which now this year, because of new accounting rules, that goes to the balance sheet where it was a footnote before. So we really, we're setting aside money for the unfunded pension liability. But I really would like to ask the Budget Committee so we can consider as an entire council a plan to look at these very significant $168 million worth of maintenance and figure out how we're going to fund this. Because if we keep kicking it down the road, 5 or 10 years from now, we're going to have a huge bell curve in front of us that the city will not be able to do. So I just like, as the head of the Finance Committee, I just wanted to bring that up. Okay, Councilmember Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of items from different commissions that I'm a member of representing City of Palm Springs. First, recently I raised a question as part of the investment report as to whether or not City of Palm Springs had any investments in firms that either manufacture or distribute guns, and was reassured that by virtue of our social responsibility policy, we do not have any such investments. I asked a similar question of the Riverside County Transportation Commission and the Sunline Transportation Board. Sunline is still investigating as to whether or not they do or do not have any gun manufacturing stock in their portfolio. I will report back once I learn of that. Riverside County Transportation Commission did have an opportunity to study and came to a determination that they did not have any investments in gun manufacturers or gun distributors. This was not as a result of a social responsibility policy similar to what City of Palm Springs has, but the result of their guidelines for the financial strength of where they make investments. Staff did report back to me that if at some point in time in the future they would have any investments in firms that manufactured or distributed guns, that they would report that back to the City of Palm Springs so that we could make a determination here on this council as to whether or not we wanted to make a request of the Transportation Commission to not have such an investment policy. I cannot tell you as to what the opinion of the various cities in Riverside County that are part of the Transportation Commission would be to such a move on our part were we to take it. But what I can report is, at least as of this moment, there are no investments in such firms at Riverside County Transportation Commission. And given the size of their investment portfolio, I think that is pretty profound. A second commission that I'm a part of, the Coachella Valley Mountain Conservancy, at their recent meeting on March 12, City of Palm Springs was an applicant for the Mountain Conservancy to purchase the property that has been known as the Crescendo Project. The proposal was for the Mountain Conservancy to purchase this for the price that was being asked for by the owner of the property, Grit Development, which is $5 million or approximately $120,000 per acre. Given rules regarding conflict of interest, I was not able to participate in that discussion since the City of Palm Springs was the applicant, but I was present when the discussion took place. The staff report did not recommend moving forward with that purchase due to staff's opinion that it was doubtful that it would make any improvements in the water quality of the area, is not in an undisturbed state. The property is near development and is not a recognized protected species habitat. The Mountain Conservancy voted unanimously not to purchase the property at $5 million. There was minimal interest even at a reduced price for the purchase of the Crescendo project. So that matter is now back to staff here in Palm Springs for us to make a decision as to whether we want to move forward.
Councilmember Middleton, could you please elaborate on where the Crescendo project is? We know, but some people may not. Wait, push your button again. Would you push your button again?
Crescendo project is adjacent to Tramway Road and is immediately a part of the Chino Cone, although it is right at the very edge of the Chino Cone. The last one is Desert Community Energy, and I had the opportunity to sit in on that meeting this Monday, covering for Councilmember Coors. Desert Community Energy is the community choice aggregation program that is being worked on by Coachella Valley Association of Government. Currently, there are 3 cities that are planning to participate in that program: Cathedral City, Palm Desert, and the City of Palm Springs. Progress is moving forward to have the startup of the CCA available to customers in Palm Springs before the end of summer this year. The option to opt out of the program will be made known to everyone within our city. There are going to be 2 plan options that will be available to individuals, actually 3. You can stay with Southern California Edison to purchase power for you, or you can take a basic plan which will increase the amount of green energy over what you get from Southern California Edison and reduce the amount of your cost probably by approximately 3% on your generation bill, not your total bill, just your generation bill from Edison. There will also be a 100% carbon-free option that will be available. The carbon-free option does include legacy hydropower, but will not include any nuclear power, will not include any new large hydrogen power or hydropower. And later, we will hope to develop a local green option, even for individuals who take the 100% carbon-free option. We are hopeful that their bill will come in very close to, if not even with, what they are paying now to Southern California Edison. This is going to be a great move forward for our residents and our community. Thank you.
Dr. Reddy, you have a request to speak button in. Did you? Okay, do you want Mayor Pro Tem first to go first? Do you want to go ahead? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Just I wanted to report out to council on 2 meetings that I attended. Once with Councilwoman Middleton, we met with Grit Development on the downtown subcommittee, which would be the downtown development subcommittee. The topics for that meeting were specifically how we would handle Parcel B, which is where the Virgin Hotel is approved to go. And Parcel B is, it would really be Parcel B1. Parcel B, I guess, is where H&M is, isn't it? I think so. Behind H&M, that group of development. So it's the parcel that's directly east of what will be the new downtown park. And there are two concepts for that. One is that it would become a temporary sculpture garden, and we would work in concert with our Arts Commission on that and the Palm Springs Art Museum. The other option is that it would just become additional parking for now. Apparently, the Virgin Hotel is slated to start in about a year from now. And so we asked for more information on that, and so we don't have a definite decision on that. The other meeting that Councilwoman Middleton and I both attended was the recycling diversion ad hoc. And that meeting is specifically working with the Palm Springs Disposal Service about diverting more construction waste into our recycling stream. And so, and what kind of an ordinance we would need if we were going to write an ordinance along those lines. And so we asked for more information from them, as well as we requested that they come up with some programs that will make the concept of diverting construction debris into recycling more appealing for contractors and builders. Right now, the problem is you are required by the City of Palm Springs to use Palm Springs Disposal Service for all disposal needs, but what we have on some sites is that people are hiring side people to haul away construction debris to the dump directly. And the problem with that, besides a violation of our franchise agreement, is that when Palm Springs, when the disposal service does it, they automatically separate the recyclables from the garbage in the construction debris. So we're looking for some programs that will be more appealing. You know, we're going to use sugar, I hope, instead of vinegar to attract contractors and builders to start doing better recycling diversion. And we'll report more on that program when we get it. But it was a good meeting, and Palm Springs Disposal Service is dedicated to coming up with some new and better ways to do that. We challenged them to be the new model by which other cities would use for diverting. The best news we got out of that meeting is about 700,000 tons of construction debris is thrown out, and 50,000 tons of it are already being separated, and the recycling's being diverted. So we are not only doing really well on that front, but we are meeting and exceeding the state requirement currently for recycling. That's getting stepped up, and I think is it a year, Lisa? It's moving to a 75% diversion requirement for recycling on construction debris. So we're developing new plans to meet that, and I trust that we will. Lisa, did you want to add anything to either of those?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few updates about some of my work for the city, and then I have a general comment and request for staff. So first, I sit as the liaison to the Palm Springs Animal Shelter, and I wanted to announce that the Animal Shelter hired a director of operations, who's Mr. Craig Ewing. So that's very exciting for our shelter as we move forward in streamlining our processes and having someone oversee all the operations there. I think it'll make a big difference for our community and for the amazing work that the Animal Shelter does. It's just become such a large operation and so successful, and so I think that will be great to have that success continue. I also wanted to update that I attend the Community Action Partnership meetings. I was appointed to that board as a city council member for the city of Palm Springs. That's through the county of Riverside. My first meeting, they considered and decided to move those meetings from Banning or somewhere in the middle of the region to Riverside itself. So I voted no on behalf of the city of Palm Springs. At my first meeting, I made some good friends. And I voted no for our residents who have a right to attend those meetings and be aware of the poverty prevention programs. It's a big poverty prevention board that does a lot of good work for the entire region. Unfortunately, I was outvoted, and so those meetings are now in Riverside, which I will attend begrudgingly. Another update is our homelessness task force for our city has scheduled our quarterly meeting for April 12th. That will be at 4 p.m. at the Fire Training Center, which is 3000 East Alejo. A lot of people constantly are asking Jeff and I, who serve as the subcommittee on homelessness, how they can get involved, and we meet with a lot of interested residents who want to talk more about homelessness with us, and we're always happy to do that. But really the best way to get involved on this issue is come to that homelessness task force meeting so that you can get apprised of what everything is, what we're all doing on that issue, and so that you can help out and get involved too. So that'll be on the city calendar of events. Councilmember Middleton and I attended the Principal for a Day program with the Palm Springs Unified School District. So I went to Cielo Vista Charter School and saw their K through 8 program. I got to go to a slime making class where the kids were making slime, and I also got to be in the room where they announced to the 8th graders who had applied for transfers to Palm Springs High. They live from all over the region, and they really wanted to go to Palm Springs High because of the excellent education that's available there. And I got to be in the room in the principal's office when they announced it to the students, and they actually cheered and jumped up and down and screamed, and I've never seen quite anything like it, students being excited to go to high school. So it was really, it was just a really good experience, and to be reminded of all the kids that are in our community and go to our schools here, and the high school students, and they're it was a really fantastic experience. And Councilmember Middleton went to Kuia, is that right? Or you went to?
I was in Vinci Elementary School. I had an absolutely wonderful time. I got to play leprechaun and mess up classes while students were out. I am the tallest leprechaun known to, and probably the most English. And I came away from that experience absolutely refreshed and incredibly proud of the educators, the principal, and the students in our community. I dare anyone who thinks that education is not moving forward in a good direction to spend 4 or 5 hours on the campus of one of our schools, because it will change your mind from what you hear and see on the television news every night. Our educators are doing fabulous work.
Thank you. It was really fantastic. We only did a half day, and we only did the fun parts, and I was still exhausted and had to go rest afterward. So thank you to our educators in Palm Springs. My final comment is about pedestrian safety. So I know we had 2 fatalities over the last week or so, and I got a lot of emails from constituents asking about what we can do as a city to, to review our pedestrian safety and really to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent these types of fatalities. I know a lot of that is still being investigated about what happened in those particular incidents, but I'm just making a comment broadly. So I would like to see us bring that back for a discussion item, or have some recommendations, or appoint a subcommittee through the council so that we can sort of take on that issue. I know staff works on that on a daily basis, but I, as a council member, would like to help support that work so that we can protect all of our people here in Palm Springs. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So 2 things for staff. One is Ordinance 1927, which is the rental assistance ordinance that former council member Fote and I drafted for conversion of apartments into other projects, hotels, condominiums, et cetera. We did a 1-year ordinance with the thought that we might want to expand it through the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. That hasn't happened yet, so it expires on April 5th. So can we please bring that back to extend it as an urgency ordinance at the next meeting, and then maybe the Affordable Housing Subcommittee could look at any revisions, but we don't want to have a gap in those protections for tenants. So that was one. The other was a couple meetings ago, I asked for us to look into some potential changes when people file appeals to our Board of Appeals, so that we don't have a situation when we only have 3 of the 5 members present, and on a 2-to-1 vote, someone's denied an appeal. And I know some of the suggestions the city attorney and I talked about was having alternates for that board, but if we can move on that, because I don't want us to be in that position again where we are in the position we only have 3 members, and if it's not unanimous, someone has less than the majority of the board members voting to deny them their appellate rights. And the last thing I have is actually a statement from the entire council, which I'm going to read part of, and Councilmember Middleton's going to read part of, but it's been approved by the entire council. So on March 5th, 2018, the City of Palm Springs received a letter from an attorney representing the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project and its members residing in Palm Springs. The letter alleges that Palm Springs is in violation of the California Voting Rights Act due to the city's process of utilizing at-large elections instead of district elections to elect members of our city council, and that the at-large election process has diminished the ability of Latino residents to impact elections and has resulted in racially polarized voting. The Southwest Voter Registration Education Project requests that the city voluntarily switch from at-large elections to district elections pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act, or face judicial action to force the city to do so. A determination of whether Palm Springs or any other elected governmental body is in violation of the California Voting Rights Act is based on an analysis of the relevant facts which are considered under law. The Southwest Voter Registration Education Project cites Palm Springs' large Latino population and historic lack of Latino representation on the City Council and as an example of evidence for their claim. They did not include a demographic analysis in support of their claim of racially polarized voting and did not mention that one has been performed. Although a court would likely consider the totality of the circumstances to determine if a violation of the California Voting Rights Act exists, the key legal questions considered include whether the protected minority group's voters have a diminished ability to influence election outcomes and whether there is evidence of racially polarized voting. Those determinations require a detailed demographic analysis, as the facts are the basis of any legal judgment as to whether a violation exists. It should be noted that creation of a district where a protected minority group is the majority is not required under the California Voting Rights Act. The public process will begin on April 19th at a special meeting. While it's important to obtain the demographic information prior to making any decision or recommendation, it should be noted that no California city served with a notice of violation of the California Voting Rights Act has won in court and sustained an at-large election system for all members of the City Council. Each city that has fought district elections has lost and been required to pay both sides' attorney's fees and costs in their losing effort. These fees can and often do run into millions of dollars.
Recently, our neighbors, Cathedral City and Indio, received such a notice. Both Cathedral City and Indio chose to change their at-large elections to district-based elections for all members of their city councils. Similarly, Palm Springs Unified School Board and the College of the Desert Board of Trustees have moved to district elections in recent years. Most California city councils elected at large, upon receipt of a voting rights violation notice, have chosen to voluntarily switch to districts. A few cities have chosen to fight this request. In one of the most significant cases, the city of Palmdale, in 2012, lost and was ordered to switch to district elections. Palmdale paid millions in legal fees to plaintiff and defense counsel and had their districts drawn not by their city council after input from their residents, but by plaintiff's counsel. Recent changes in law make it even more difficult to win these lawsuits than it was in 2012. Since receiving the letter, we have met with our city attorney and the City Council Ad Hoc Subcommittee on California Voting Rights Act, consisting of Councilmember Coors and myself, has met with outside expert counsel. We have engaged a demography expert to fully understand and document our voting patterns by ethnicity and geography, and will share the results at public hearings once we receive them. We intend to fully understand every legal and financial decision that is before us and provide that information to our residents. Finally, our public hearings will take place prior to making any decision and include the public in the process of drawing any districts that could be formed. Most importantly, we remain committed to diversity and inclusion and will proceed in a manner that is consistent with the law and our values. Long before the receipt of this letter, the city took steps to make diversity and inclusion a priority. In 2016, we created an Ethics, Transparency, and Government Reform Task Force. We already have implemented many of the task force's recommendations. Over the past few months, the Government Reform Working Group and the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group have met to finalize recommendations to ensure our elections serve our residents and that our government reflects the diversity that is Palm Springs. As always, we are committed to making decisions in an open and transparent manner that are in the best interests of our residents. End of statement. And Mr. City Manager, I believe this statement is being made available now to the public in written form. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment that because this was pending litigation, we considered this in closed session earlier, and I appointed the ad hoc committee of Councilmember Coors and Councilmember Middleton, and that's why they've been working on this, because of, so people understand, because of Brown Act restrictions, only 2 council members can work on this, but as was described, we will be going into a number of public meetings on this, so the entire community will be involved. Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Mayor, I had left one important piece out of an earlier report. When Councilwoman Middleton and I met with Grit Development and the Downtown Development Subcommittee, one of the items for discussion was also the Town and Country Center, which the City Council had given a Class 1 designation to when we rewrote the specific plan for the downtown development. And part of the requirements in the rewrite of the specific plan was that until the developer determined how he intended to use that property, the property had to be preserved, cleaned up, shored up, repainted, and mothballed properly so that it wouldn't have any more decline. And we've had a number of meetings. Of course, we're working with the city's designated preservation organization, which is Palm Springs Modern Committee. They've done an awesome job. They've been researching a lot of history and currently are working closely with Dunn Edwards to research the original paints and the original colors for the building. So the building, or the entire complex of the Town and Country Center, along with being shored up and repaired and landscape cleanup, will be repainted to its original colors. At least that's what we're looking at now, but we'll bring that to the council before those final decisions are made. But again, the idea is to get it cleaned up until such time the developer changes his focus from the new development back to the Town and Country Center. Of course, with the Class 1 designation, the original Town and Country Center will need to stay intact regardless of what else the developer wants to do on the property and within the parking lots of that property. But more to come on that.
A question, Mayor Pro Tem. Has the color palette been sent to the HSPB yet?
Not yet. They haven't completed the research on that, but once it is, obviously the entire package of what's happening to or with Town and Country will be sent to HSPB for their comments, and then of course come back to the council finally.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, a couple things, and Council, a couple things I would just like to note as we get started. I'd like the Chief to come to the microphone. We've had a very interesting improvement in our crime statistics. And I thought this was so important that I want to ask the chief to take a minute and walk you through a couple of these important numbers. Can we have the slide up, please?
Yes, pretty incredible. And you know, it's not just the police department. There's a lot to be said behind that slide. Obviously, 47% decrease in residential burglary in a town where we're a tourist destination, and that's on top of 23% drop in 2016. And let me just share with you some factors that I see that have been stacked against us. Obviously, Assembly Bill 109 knocked down drug crimes, all the misdemeanors. The threshold for theft is now $950. 40,000 plus inmates have been released in Riverside County jails earlier than they were expected to. All those things are things that work against our efforts. So when I became chief, I made it a point that we need to partner with the community and get 1PS on board and prevent it before it occurs. Because when the crime is occurring, they're not doing it in jail time, and the criminals are aware of this. So this is a direct result of the partnership of our community, the constant engagement, 1PS on board, and of course the decisions that you've made and the council members before you in getting us additional resources, because it's heavy resource allocation to educate the public and get them on board to partner up and prevent it and let them know that they have an equal responsibility to police their city, and there's the results. Some other factors, I mean, clearly, obviously, the additional officers downtown has freed up our patrol officers to engage our community. The homeless outreach teams that you've given us has also freed up our patrol officers to go and engage in our community. And another big factor that many people probably don't even consider is a team that you created for our vacation rentals. Vacation rentals was heavily relied upon the police department to go and respond and address those calls for service. Probably 90+% decrease in response to vacation rentals because of that team that's been created has relieved the police department to, again, engage our community to drive these numbers down.
Thank you, Chief. Great news.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. And Mayor, one other thing I'd just like to point out to you, there's one more slide if we could put up. As you know, we just finished Modernism Week. And I think this was just worth mentioning. Note, as you can see, their attendance has grown significantly over the 5 years. Their demographics, every state in the union is represented in 19 countries, and then all of the events and free events. So I just thought it'd be worth noting that. They just finished, and I know Mr. Mobley is in the audience with us this evening, but I thought it was important to point out the success of Modernism Week this year.
Mr. Mayor and Dr. Reddy, Chris, if you're open to it, you want to come up and give us a little more on that? I know there's a lot more than one little slide when it comes to Modernism Week, and maybe give us some more figures, and some financial figures would be awesome too if you have them.
Sure. So first of all, on behalf of the board and the staff at Modernism Week, we'd like to thank City Council, Mayor Moon, the city manager, the city attorney, everybody that was involved in helping us this year and your support, but mostly for securing the downtown lot for camp this year. It was significant. And it really helped boost our numbers this year to 126,000. So thank you very much for that. Some other numbers we have would be the economic impact. This year we estimated it to be about 47 million, 0.5. It's an evolving number, and I think that now that we've gotten to this point, we'll probably look to the city for help with this number in the future, but also to go out and look for a firm or a consultant to kind of start really looking into that number to see what the real impact is.
Awesome. Any significant issues that came up for you that you want us to know about or that we can help with?
Not really. It was a great event. I don't know. Did you attend anything? It was pretty fascinating. You know, the great thing is that...
It was on fire, Chris.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing is that we had 26 neighborhood organizations that opened up their homes this year. We expanded our programming down Valley, which really helped. Our partner organizations increased the number of events that they were having, so it really all came together as a real community event this year, and so we really appreciate everybody getting involved. We had over 400 local volunteers working with this as well.
Chris, would you, I'm hoping that you will do some sort of press release on this because so the wider community can know the positive impacts of this event. I think, Dr. Reddy, if I'm not wrong, hasn't modernism even eclipsed the film festival on the revenues and resources and things that it's bringing in to the city and attendance as well?
And I'd leave it there.
Well, I'd like to know.
David, unfortunately now with the new change tonight, if you want to speak, I have to approve it. I don't know why, but so, you know, you have to give me a second to push the button up here. It's a new change, sorry.
Again, I just want to say thank you very much. You guys have been great support to us this year, and it really shows. It really shows. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, next item is consent calendar. I will entertain a motion to accept the consent calendar without items 1Q and 1H. Motion is on the floor. Motion to approve made by Councilmember Kors, seconded by Councilmember Holstage. Motion is on the floor. Yes. I'm sorry. Oh, dadgummit. Okay.
Motion passes 5-0.
For the technical people in the back room, this is not working, these new changes. We're going to have to discuss this. Okay. Next item on the first item Q, which is public comment regarding United States Bureau of Land Management review of Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan use amendment. Councilmember Holstage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I pulled this item to make a few comments to the public as well. So this is public comment. So the City of Palm Springs making formal public comment to the United States Bureau of Land Management. Trump issued an executive order last March called Promoting Energy Independence that would reopen the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan that our community spent hundreds and hundreds of hours working on to strike a balance between development, conservation of our surrounding desert area. And so I had requested at the last council meeting that the City of Palm Springs make a formal comment that we do not support the reopening of that plan because it represents a balance that the entire community agreed upon. It's important for our city because it affects our air quality, our conservation, our recreational lands, our clean energy availability, and a lot of other issues that are important to our residents. And so thank you to city staff, the city attorney, the city council for considering this. And moving forward and submitting formal comment, I think we always talk about Palm Springs being a leader for our region and as well as the state. And I know it's important to all of us to be a leader on conservation. We received today as well a letter from the Sierra Club in support of the City of Palm Springs formal comment that will be submitted if you accept this. And so I also wanted to make a comment to the public that all members of the public are also able to submit formal comment. The deadline is tomorrow, March 22nd. And if you look at the staff report, it gives direction about how to submit that formal comment. And you can do so electronically to the email address for the Bureau of Land Management. So thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And this is reminiscent of the last council when we passed a similar resolution opposing the Eagle Mountain project where they're going to be pumping billions of gallons of water out of a reservoir to do a hydroelectric dam, and at which time I said, doesn't make sense to put windmills where there's no wind. Why have hydroelectric where there's no water? So sometimes we have to comment on these things in our region. So motion to approve has been made by Councilmember Holstage. Motion second by Mayor Pro Tem Roberts. Motion is on the floor.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, next item, public hearings. Item for the first public hearing, Community Development Block Grant CDBG 2018-19 Annual Action Plan and CDBG Budget Adoption and authorization for submission to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development for the fiscal year 2018-19 Community Development Block Grant Program, 44th program year, and authorizing the city manager to execute all sub-recipient agreements. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. Each year, the City of Palm Springs receives Community Development Block Grant funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Funds are allocated locally and are used for various programs and projects in the city that accomplish one of three national objectives. Those are benefiting low and moderate income persons, eliminating slums or blight, and meeting urgent local community development needs. It is important to note that 70% of CDBG expenditures must benefit low and moderate income persons. The program administration of the funds cannot exceed 20% of the annual allocation. Public service grants are limited to 15% of the annual allocation. And public facilities must benefit persons of low to moderate income. By way of process, staff announced the availability of the RFP for CDBG funding for the upcoming fiscal year on December 28th and again on January 17th. Email announcements were also sent on December 28th. A pre-proposal workshop was held on January 18th. 9 RFPs were distributed. 8 proposals requesting funding were submitted by the February 1 deadline. A Citizens Advisory Committee, or CAC, was assembled to evaluate the proposals. The CAC held a public hearing on February 22nd, and all 7 RFP respondents attended the public hearing, and the CAC finalized the recommendations on March 1st. Today's public hearing is the second of the 2 required public hearings for the CDBG funding allocation process. The CDBG allocations recommended by the CAC are intended to be the annual action plan for fiscal year 2019. It should also be noted that the consolidated plan is the broader 5-year community development plan required by HUD for all jurisdictions that apply for and receive HUD funding. The consolidated plan is designed to help local jurisdictions assess their affordable housing and community development needs and market conditions. The annual action plan implements and provides the actions, activities, and resources that would be used each year to address the priority needs and specific goals identified in the consolidated plan. As you can see, the proposed programs recommended by the CAC provide for a variety of activities to benefit low and moderate income residences and to accomplish the national goals. This includes improvements to nonprofit medical and social service facilities, ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, curb and ramp improvements in low and moderate income neighborhoods, emergency assistance to low-income seniors, providing assistance to low and moderate income tenants, improving facilities for programs and services, and providing protection and advocacy for residents in skilled nursing and resident care facilities. Your action tonight will determine what the action plan will be. Notice of the availability of the action plan will be made available to the public following tonight's action that you take and pursuant to a 30-day public review period. Programs and activities are scheduled to begin on August 1. I'd also like to recognize and thank the CAC members for their time and effort in assisting the city. Ron DeHart, representing Human Rights Commission, Les Young, representing the Parks and Recreation Commission, Doug Donenfeld, representing the Planning Commission, Anita Ramsey, representing HIV/AIDS population, Kathy Cohn, representing targeted income quality areas. And due to staffing transitions, we did not have a CAC member representing the senior population. The CAC's recommendations are before you for your consideration. Staff is available to answer any questions you may have. CAC members may also be in the audience, and applicants for the CDBG funding may also be available.
Okay, do we have any questions of staff before we open the public hearing? Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jay. A few questions. So, when applications are brought in for the block grants for specific things, constructions, examples of that would be number one, the Desert AIDS project for their energy efficiency LED retro lighting upgrade, Public Works doing its ADA curb ramp, Mizell wanting $40,000 for an enclosure. Do real bids come with that? How are those determined and monitored in terms of those sums? And we're not seeing any of that. So if we're being asked to make that determination, I'd like to really, how do we know those monies are going to be spent for those things? And how do we, and what say do we have in the determination of the costs of these things? Particularly when other things that have, other groups obviously that have applied are getting nothing.
Perhaps we can have one of our city staff members address the funding process, the budgeting and allocation, which includes the CDBG funds. Thank you, Tom.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. The city has funded the curb ramp projects with CDBG funding. It's part of the budget process and part of the capital improvement program process. We have several projects that do curb ramp improvements throughout the city. Those are associated with pavement rehabilitation projects, the slurry seal projects, and sidewalk projects. But the CDBG funding is the only one that's targeted specifically to curb ramps in low and moderate income areas. We have a list of those areas in the affected curb ramps. We develop a cost estimate based on the available CDBG funding that's been historically put to these projects, and then we come up with a project to fit that available funding. And we allocate that, or we propose that budget for the next fiscal year.
Councilmember Coors? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that didn't answer my question on some of the other ones. In other words, obviously these groups make requests. So the city one is a little easier because we go through a very strict bidding process for everything that we do. But some of the other organizations like DAP and Mizell, do we get very specific multiple bids for these sort of things? Is there a protocol that we follow for this? And again, we're not seeing any of that background in this. We're just seeing recommendations for chunks of money going out.
And I can help with that, Councilman. So we have contracts. We'll have contracts with each of the organizations, and there's a process that not only we monitor, that HUD requires us to monitor on the expenditures, when they're expenditures, the pricing, the procurement formalities. So that's all part of our contract. And we certainly can give you updates on those reports because we provide those to HUD on a regular basis, and we can start providing them to council.
So you're telling me that you will monitor these expenses to make sure they're being spent on the things that they're requested?
It's monitored very closely. In fact, the HUD guidelines are very, very strict and aggressive, particularly on those issues. So there are reports certainly we can supply to council that you can have a comfort level that the dollars are being spent on the projects as council had envisioned.
With their applications, do they come in with bids? on things? Or how
Jay-
how does CAP make those determinations?
They do not. They do not come in with bids. They are estimates from each of the organizations, and those bids are performed at a later time.
But there are clear procurement formalities that they have to abide by under HUD guidelines.
Okay, yeah, I would like to see more on that, because this is important money, and it's big chunks of money, and there's a lot of people who don't get it, who want it, and there's, obviously a lot of great work that can be done with these dollars, and it's really going to a handful of people. And that concludes my question.
Councilmember Coors?
Sure. A couple things. One is, I see in the staff analysis that we're assuming level funding from last year. Is that based on HUD or Congress saying they're going to continue funding at a level amount?
That's based on our best estimate from the information they provided, which is it may be a little more, maybe a little less. Congress may approve it, maybe not.
So it could be enough. We don't know.
Over the last several years, it's been sometimes almost well after this process that they actually give us the final amount. So it could be a month from now that we learn the actual amount.
Okay, so we're doing this based on an
Our best
assumption,
estimate.
and we may have to come back and make
Yes.
changes. Okay. Second question I had is, in just looking at our strategic goals for the city tied to this, which include a lot of affordable housing and mobile home housing and homeless housing, we don't really have any, we have one fair housing project, but we don't have anyone applying from what I can tell on this. So what kind of outreach are we doing to try and get closer aligned to the goals? Because it seems, over at least this is my third year doing this, it tends to be a lot of energy-related things for social service organizations, which are all great. But what are we doing to make sure we're trying to achieve more of the goals here? Because these applications, a lot of them are in that sort of same category and not hitting any of the other goals. And
And I'm going to ask Jay to maybe comment a little more broadly, but generally, part of the issue is, we're barely an entitlement city, is a smaller city, and our resources, there's roughly 300,000, and then there's categories of where it can go. We don't have a lot of the pie towards that kind of project, which is a big ticket item. That being said, we also have very minimal staff that work on this. So, could we do a better job at doing outreach to certain areas? I think we probably could. One thing I would suggest, we've not had any council subcommittee really focus on this in some time, and it may be time to revisit that. So that's one. As council subcommittee on this, I think process going forward might be helpful. And also, Jay, I don't know if you can add anything more to the outreach effort. And I would just note, Dale Cook, who is our staff CDBG person, he has had a family emergency which has taken him out of the city. So that's why he's not with us this evening.
Right. Other than what I had previously mentioned on the outreach, beginning with notices in public papers of being distributed throughout the region, and emails to known service providers and affordable housing entities. However, one thing I would add is with the $300,000, it's not going to go very far with any type of new affordable housing production, but it may help, and we would definitely look for those opportunities.
Yeah, and, yes, with that amount of money, we're not going to build affordable housing, but one of our goals is to support rental assistance for folks to keep them from becoming homeless, and that is something we know there are organizations that are doing that kind of work. So I just want to make sure we're looking at our goals, and I do want to appreciate that we've really changed the makeup and council's direction 2 years ago, that we don't have any members of the organizations that applied, board or staff, on the committee anymore. And I really appreciate that. But if I look at the folks who are on it, I very much appreciate their work, we really don't have representatives from homeless or housing-related entities, right? So we have entities, seniors, HIV, and, but we don't have housing or homeless representatives. And I don't know what the requirement on the makeup is, but I think we should look at that moving forward, given that's also in the city's top goals, right, to increase resources related to homelessness and affordable housing. So, is there HUD guidelines on who the representatives are?
Actually, they are, and this is why I think actually, since it's been a while, a council subcommittee on this, as we move in, we got a process for next year, a review, some guidance from the subcommittee, some drilling down more on these details, I think might be helpful here. Because the other thing that you mentioned, now that we are more in the social service business, some of the wraparound services could be eligible for these block grants that we should be applying for potentially next year as well. So that you would raise that. Those things I think maybe we can flesh out with some subcommittee work.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Middleton.
Okay. I want to thank everybody who was involved in this process. I know how much work there is that's involved. I do have a question on one specific project that did not receive funding, and I'd like to better understand what that project was intended to do and the decision not to fund it, and that is the solar radar speed sign project. Could I get a better understanding as to what exactly it was intended to do?
Can you? Sure. We'll have Tom Garcia come up on that one. Thank you.
And I apologize for not giving you a heads up on that in advance.
Quite all right. The radar speed feedback signs were intended to be placed in locations throughout the city where we have excessive speeds. It was part of a traffic calming citywide on specific corridors. The benefit of these signs would have been to order a limited number of signs, but place the bases throughout the city with a small traffic cover over them, so that they're placed in the sidewalks. When the traffic cover is in place and the sign isn't there, you can move the sign from location to location based on the need. We are implementing these on a couple of corridors now, Farrell being one of them. As a matter of fact, they just dug the foundations this last week, so they are going in place. We hope to include these in some more traffic calming projects, as well as some of the pedestrian safety projects that we're doing with CBAG.
And as we move into the budget year, I'd like us to take a look at whether or not this is the kind of project that we should be putting into our budget. As we know, we have traffic fatalities and pedestrian fatalities, and things that will help slow speeds down are something that I think we should prioritize.
And actually, Council Member, that is coming forward in the capital budget, and my sense is we need a significant more number than 4. So you'll see that as part of the budget that we present at the next council meeting.
Thank you. I echo some of my fellow council members' questions and concerns. I think it's because this council likes to do our homework and really get in the weeds sometimes, and so we don't see what the agencies submitted or even why some of the projects weren't recommended. I think that was Council Member Middleton's question of why wasn't this City of Palm Springs Public Works and Engineering solar radar speed sign recommended. And so I think it's a wonderful idea to have a subcommittee from council. I would love to serve on that subcommittee going forward so we can kind of streamline and get as much information as this council wants to do that. So I have just some staff questions, or did you want to respond to that?
Well, if council, I think we have some members of the committee in the audience, if you would like them to speak to that with their selection. Do we have any?
That's okay. I was going to ask a few questions that I think might get into that of staff.
That's fine.
Thank you. Right, because we were given these evaluation scores, and so it noted evaluation scores, but it didn't quite, and it gave the numbers, like how many county or Palm Springs residents were served, and then it had an evaluation score, and I was wondering what that meant so that I could use those?
Les, can you address that?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
In each project recommended for funding, it has different numbers below it in the staff report, which you're not looking at. And it says Palm Springs residents. It lists how many, for example, the Desert AIDS Project proposal will serve, I think it says 1,100 Palm Springs residents, and then it has an evaluation score of 30 versus some of the other ones have evaluation scores of 20 and 29, and so I don't have any information about what that means.
We looked at several criteria and applied a number for each of us, and what Dale did was took all of our results and averaged them out. So one of us may have actually included the stop signs being numbered and being lit up, and not included ramps based on the scoring until they were averaged together. That's what you're looking at.
So that's an internal number that you used in ranking the different proposals.
Each of the criteria to make sure that it was meeting what the requirements were.
Okay.
And I'd also add that as we have some new members on the council, council does have the discretion to change this recommendation anyway and obviously distribute that based on a different priority.
Sure.
Kathy was also on the committee with us.
When Dale notified me that he wasn't going to be here, he also indicated that the amount of money that we had expected was less than what he had projected, and that was the reason. I think we had originally funded all of the applications, but I think that one fell off at the end when there wasn't as much money, and that happened after we adjourned.
Okay.
And
thank you.
Not all of them. There was, I think there was one that wasn't.
There was one other that was absolutely was not funded.
And one of the other criteria was how ready we felt the job was to go to be launched. And so that's part of the evaluation score that you look at. If they hadn't done the appropriate, specs of what they wanted to do and figure out approximately what they were going to need, and weren't ready to launch as soon as the effective date was to come, then we figured it was less likely they could finish in the amount of time, because I think they have to finish it within the fiscal year. That's one of the requirements. And so if they're not job ready, shovel ready, whatever you call it, that was part of it. And some of these people are seeking multiple sources of funding. And so because our pot is pretty small, we also looked at that to make sure that we thought that the project was viable, given the fact that they were going to have additional contributors to their project.
Thank you for your work. I appreciate it. Is it your birthday today? I almost asked you. Thank you for being here on your birthday. I have a few other questions of staff. So could you describe what all was submitted by the applicants in their requests? So what sort of documentation did they provide?
Well, I've got a number of different levels of information from each of the applicants, but generally they provided descriptions of the projects, the budgets they anticipated needing for those projects, the allocations for staffing, how the funds would be spent, and in some cases, maps showing the areas served, as they do have to be in serving low, moderate income census tracts.
Okay, thank you. And I heard that you said, and it said in the staff report, that you submitted or you sent 50 emails to different providers, and I'm wondering, I also have the sense that some of these requests, one that we only got we got 9 or so, right? When we sent out 50 emails about our RFP, and I'm wondering why you think that is, that we only got so few.
I don't know why the response level was so low, unfortunately.
But what I can't do know, historically, it's never been a high number historically. and what we can attribute that to, I can't say with any certainty right now, but again, that could be something that the subcommittee could help to explore with some different ideas.
Okay, thank you. Just outreach, possibly. And then when do you expect for us to receive our allocation?
There is a deadline, and this is due into HUD. Do you have the date it's due into HUD? Jay,
May
Council
15th.
needs to take action this evening, correct?
May 15th.
May 15th. And there's a 30-day period between when you approve it and when it has to be delivered back to HUD. And then obviously we're going to get our final number from them, and then we'll get into the contract process, and then the money comes in as the contracts get implemented.
Okay, so we're required to take action and submit that to HUD, and then we get the final amount, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I also just wanted to share my thoughts, which were similar to Councilmember Coors, about the CAC members. And I saw that tenants and tenants organizations weren't represented, affordable housing, homelessness, providers and experts. And I also thought that that was quite a stark difference from our strategic plan goals, which 2/3 of that is related to housing, affordability, preventing homelessness. And if you do think about, and I know we're limited in who responds in terms of what projects we can fund, because we don't have a department that does that here at the City of Palm Springs, but if you think that $40,000 or $50,000 to go to Fair Housing Council that provides some assistance to tenants, when that could go to actual vouchers preventing homelessness. It seems like we need to do some more work on really our goals themselves, and then how we're doing outreach to different organizations that we want responding to these. And that's nothing, I know all of these organizations who are on the list, I've worked with them, I think they're all great, but I really think we want to cast a really wide net if we're going to achieve these strategic plan goals. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Jay, another comment in how we look at this in the future. So one of the problems that I struggle with in looking at these recommendations is, on the sheet I'm looking at as an example, I'll just use Desert Age Project because they're the first one. And their request was for energy efficiency LED retrofit lighting. Well, they've been getting large chunks of money for the last 5 years, but I don't know what it was for. So what would be helpful is a sentence very similar to the description for what they're requesting this year on what they've gotten in the past. I think it would help us to know and balance these dollars better, to know where the monies are going over the years. In this case, it looks like over the last 5 years, they've gotten over $350,000 just on an LED lighting retrofit. I don't think that's what it is. I think that's for this year. But it's still over 5 years, they've gotten a very, very large chunk of money. I'm not second guessing that all those dollars went for good things. DAP is a great organization and does astonishing work for us. But if we're being asked to really examine these block grants and approve them and balance them, we don't have anywhere near the information we should have on these. I agree with Dr. Reddy that a subcommittee will help, but I really think we should look a lot closer at how these reports are written. This one is pretty thin, frankly.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I do remember last year the DAP was for the preparations for, Mayor Pro Tem, last year the DAP was for helping the installation of emergency diesels to support their refrigeration systems for medications in case of a power loss. So I mean, you're right, they had a good reason last year, but it's not documented here. You have to remember back a year on it.
Or 5 years.
Or 5 years. I know the discussion is to have a subcommittee, but even if we have a subcommittee, that's only 2 people. And I don't want 2 people making the decisions on this. We all need to make decisions. We need more information. For instance, the Neuro Vitality Center, I drive by there every day on the way to City Hall and usually a couple times. And that place is busy. I know it's busy, but all it says is denied. It doesn't say why it was denied. So we really need to have more information, even if we have a subcommittee on these requests, so we can not
Mayor,
necessarily read them here, but we can read them.
It might be helpful, the members, this is within their discretion, and unless you want to, if you could speak to why they denied
Okay, sure. I was going to, I trust their judgment. I'm just saying it would be nice going forward, anytime anything is approved or denied, that we have a little bit more in the staff report so we can read it during our council preparations and know. But I'm not questioning the decision. I'm just saying we need that information. But go ahead.
But it is a good question, and the issue was that none of it was related to health. It was painting and doing some work that would make a hallway between two units look better. And that didn't seem to us to bring any value to the company. There was no, or to the group, there was no, we'd asked if they were removing popcorn ceilings that might be health related. That wasn't the issue. It was just some finishing work that was being done. And it didn't seem relative to the use of the funds when we had such thin funds to spread with some things that would be very, very helpful.
Okay, like I said, I'm not questioning the decision of the committee. I'm just saying going forward, we need to have a comprehensive report because we read this stuff during the week before the council meeting. That way we know coming in here what the decision was based on. So with that, may we go to public hearing after an hour of discussion? Okay, with that, we will open to public hearing, and the first speaker is Judy Cressman, and then Darrell Tucci, and then retired city council member Jenny Fote.
Thank you very much. I'm Judy Cressman from Jewish Family Service of the Desert. I'm the last one on your list there. We are requesting, thank you, Mayor and members of the council, we are requesting $15,000 CDBG funding for emergency assistance for seniors, which is part of our senior care management program. JFS serves about over 600 seniors a year in our senior care management program, which includes care management services, emergency assistance, community programs for seniors, for isolated seniors, transportation services. Through our emergency assistance program, we serve about 157 seniors throughout the Coachella Valley. For emergency assistance, primarily talking about senior homelessness prevention, we provide assistance for rental assistance, utilities, medications that they cannot afford, housing repairs, plumbing repairs, air conditioning repairs. The funding from the city of Palm Springs would assist primarily with rent and utilities to prevent senior homelessness for seniors primarily. So we are requesting the $15,000 for that. What we do, we don't provide the funding directly to the senior. We have the senior meet with our case managers, bring in their bills, bring in their level of income, discuss what other services they have, what other options they have, and after that, we provide the funding directly to the vendor. So we pay the apartment manager, we pay the utility companies, we pay the medical supply companies. The average assistance right now is primarily about $300, is what we can afford with the $15,000 that we would get from the city if approved. And that would serve about 50 seniors, about 25 we're looking from the city of Palm Springs, and 25 throughout the Coachella Valley. So far we've provided about 133 seniors right now with emergency assistance. When we originally applied for CDBG funding, we were at 109, right now we're at 103. So, 133, excuse me. The need is there. We continue to receive requests for assistance from all our community partners. JFS heads a senior collaborative of Coachella Valley, and we work with a lot of the senior partners in our community, the senior centers, Mizell, Cathedral City Senior Center, Jocelyn Senior Center, Desert Advocates, I'm so sorry, Desert Advocates of the Desert. Thank you.
Ms. Cressman, your time is up. Thank you. Next speaker is Darrell Tucci.
Thank you for your time.
Laura has a handout for the council and the mayor. Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I know you, but for the record, I'm Darrell Tucci, the Chief Development Officer at Desert AIDS Project. Thank you for the opportunity to present our energy efficiency LED lighting project. We're very grateful for the previous awards that have funded many projects, including most recently our emergency preparedness generator. DAP is a federally qualified health center serving 4,600 people, 3,000 of whom live low or very low income. The majority of Desert AIDS Project clients reside in Palm Springs, 51.5% to be exact. DAP is located in Census Tract 0446.02, and this tract, Block Group 3, exceeds the HUD requirement of 51% low income threshold for funding. The majority of DAP's clients live with either HIV or AIDS, and more than 60% of Riverside County's identified people living with HIV and AIDS live within a 20-mile radius of our campus. The intent of our new project is to replace all 368 antiquated, unhealthy, energy-wasting fluorescent light bulb fixtures with energy-efficient, environmentally recommended LED lighting at our main facility. The total cost of the project is $173,000 plus in 3 phases. CDBG funding for program year 18-19 would support phase 1. This phase consists of removing and replacing 2x2 outdated fluorescent fixtures with LED fixtures and upgrading all electrical panels for 3 phases to accommodate LED lighting. Our proposed project is consistent with and advances the City of Palm Springs' commitment to the general plan to be an environmental advocate and a leader in the environmental compliance and protection, to conserve electricity and to promote sustainable development. Lastly, the project is also a crucial new component to our expansion plan that's been recently announced and reported in the Desert Sun. All I have, I'm happy to take questions. Particularly, I'm happy to speak to the transparency questions Councilmember Roberts asked earlier, if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Tucci. Okay, our next speaker is former Councilmember Jenny Fote. Welcome. Councilmember Fote, sorry. 5-minute recess? It's odd. No, I don't. I have it on discussion mode. Just push your button.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I spoke with former Councilmember Fote, and I advised her with respect to certain provisions of state law. My understanding is that she's going to withdraw her request to speak at this point in time before the body. I will certainly represent to the body that based on my conversation with her, my understanding is that any information the council needs about Mizell operations is available through Mizell staff, but based on my understanding of the law that I've shared with her, she's precluded from making the type of appearance before this body that she was intending to make.
Why?
There's a law against it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Would you like? I will be happy to cite the statute and
all right,
read the
that's all right,
statute.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anyway, we have anyone else who wishes to speak that can legally speak?
No
Okay,
other
with that,
speakers.
We will close the public comments. Okay. Any questions of staff? After an hour and a half of discussion on this, are we ready to make a motion? Someone ready to make a motion to approve? Motion approved made by Councilmember Middleton, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Roberts. Motion is on the floor. Christie?
Motion passes 4-0 with Councilmember Coors abstaining.
I have no control anymore.
The reason I abstained is because I just don't think we have enough information to make an informed decision. Not that I have anything against these projects.
Okay, thank you. Next item. Next public hearing, item 2A, a recommendation by the Historic Site Preservation Board for Class 1 Historic Site designation of the William Holden Deepwell residence located at 1323 South Driftwood Drive. Staff report, please.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, this is a request for historic designation of the residence at 1323 South Driftwood Drive. The nomination was prepared by the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation on behalf of the owners, Mark and Jane Garrison. The residence was constructed in 1955 for the George F. Barrett family. The contractor for the residence was Joe Pauling, and Mrs. Barrett is credited with the design of the residence. However, it is associated with William Holden, the actor, who owned the residence between 1966 and 1977, and hence that's why it's being called the William Holden Deepwell residence, is because of his association with the property. This is the appearance of the residence as it looks today from the street. This is the residence from the backyard of the property. And then this just gives a detail of the construction. Again, from 1955, it's a post and beam structure, large window openings, very beautifully detailed. One of the issues that was discussed relative to the property was the integrity. In terms of additions to the residence, you see the floor plan of the residence here. The areas in blue were added by Mr. Holden in 1967. He added on a garage and storeroom structure that you see at the far left of the screen, and then also added on to the breakfast nook there centrally on the screen. There was a renovation that was done in 2011 that removed some of the site wall, the garden wall in front of the residence, also covered over some of the slump stone on the exterior of the residence, replaced the existing sliding glass doors with pivoting doors, and then also replaced the front door. The Historic Site Preservation Board reviewed the nomination and found that it did meet a number of the criteria that we have in our code relative to historic designation. Specifically, they found that it met criteria number 2, associated with the life of a significant person, that being William Holden. Number 3 exemplifies a particular period of local history and also construction, criteria number 4. And then, in addition, they also found that it met criterion number 5, in terms of being the work of a master builder. They identified that contractor Joe Pauling has done a number of residences there in the Deepwell area as well as in the Mesa, and found that the application met that criteria. However, one of the issues that was discussed at the Historic Site Preservation Board meeting was the integrity of the residence. There was the concern on the part of some of our historic board members that with the renovation in 2011, it lost some of its integrity. Again, as I had pointed out, the garden wall there in the front, and the illustration, the picture there at the top of the screen is prior to 2011. I believe that photo is from 2007. And then at the bottom of the screen is as it appears today after the renovation in 2011. So again, it lost the garden wall there in front. It was replaced with a different type of wall. Some of the slump stone on the exterior was covered over with stucco, and then the replacement of doors and windows. However, in our definition of a Class 1 structure, it indicates that if the structure is restorable, it still merits designation. And it was felt that the changes that were made could be restored back to its original condition. And so consequently, the Historic Site Preservation Board did recommend that this be nominated for Class 1 designation. In the ordinance that we have, the resolution that we have for you, it does specifically cite that if the residence is restored, they are particularly looking for 4 things to be implemented back, and that would be, as I've mentioned, the changes to the front of the residence. So again, that language is in the approving resolution for you. With that, the Historic Site Preservation Board has recommended approval of the Class 1 designation. We do have Ms. Barbara Marshall here, who, as the applicant, will speak and answer any questions you might have. And then the property owners are also here to answer any questions you might have. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions you might have.
Any questions of staff before we open the public hearing? Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Fagg. I struggle a little bit with this one because of the dramatic alterations that this house has been under and or has taken. Was the vote from the HSPB unanimous on this?
The vote was unanimous with added conditions relative to restoring the elements that were lost.
But there's no requirement to do that, so I don't quite understand that.
That language is in the resolution. So if there is a renovation of the residence in the future or a restoration of the residence in the future, what we would look at as part of the certificate of approval of those changes would be to restore it back.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's unusual in that the house was just completely redone from top to bottom. Okay, thank you.
Any questions before we open public hearing?
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Holstage?
Did I surprise you?
No.
So I saw some discussion about including, it was originally 4 lots, right? And so I saw the discussion about including all 4 lots in the historic designation, or just the, I think, 2 lots that the structure is on. Which is included in this resolution? Is it all 4 lots? And what was the decision before that in the recommendation?
Correct, all 4 lots. The lots have actually been merged, and so they exist as a single parcel number. But the designation does cover what was historically the 4 lots that made up the property.
Did the Historic Site Preservation Board consider that issue and make a recommendation?
Yes, they did. They also wanted to make sure that it included what was historically the 4 lots.
Councilmember Middleton.
This may be a question for Ms. Marshall, but I'm looking at the roof line of the original residence and as it is now, and it appears that the roof line is significantly different from one version to another. That strikes me as something that will be extremely difficult to rehabilitate to the original design. Am I misreading this, or?
I believe that just the fascia piece was removed in the renovations that were done in 2011. If you can see, the post and beam structure is still evident both in the top picture and in the lower picture. And what I believe is missing is just the fascia panel on the end of those beams. But I'll ask Ms. Marshall to address that in her presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff before we open public hearings? Seeing none, we will open the floor to public comment. The applicant has up to 5 minutes to present their case, and if requested, we'll have 2 minutes available for rebuttal at the end. So would the applicant like to come forward? Good evening, Ms. Marshall. Yes, wait just a minute. I got a lot of buttons nowadays. Yeah, now you got it.
Okay, we're good. Good evening. I'm Barbara Marshall from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. The story of the Holden Deepwell residence is a fascinating one, and we learned much about the home's designer, Joe Pauling, a very colorful local builder. Pauling made a name for himself the year after building the Holden residence when 60 LA press people and movie queen Jane Russell were flown down to Palm Springs to see his 1956 House of Tomorrow. The following summer, the Desert Sun reported that thousands of people toured Pauling's project. I'd like to address a few items in the staff report. The report mentions a new pool. However, the pool is from 1955. As should be expected, the pool was resurfaced and at the same time remodeled to add stairs and a tanning shelf. However, it retains its location and its rectangular shape. The staff report also mentions the current color palette as a negative. Yes, darker paint colors were more predominant in the original paint scheme, but we all know that a layer of paint is as easily remedied as another layer of paint. Actor William Holden's additions to the floor plan more than 50 years ago are also cited as a shortcoming in staff's discussion of integrity. These changes were not only sympathetic to the design, as has been the opinion of multiple architects, but do much to strengthen Holden's association with the house. We, staff, and the HSPB all agree that Holden's association with the house rises to the level of meeting criterion 2 of the Class 1 designation. Since the changes were made during the residence's period of significance, they would likely not be allowed to be reversed, so citing them as a negative seems counterintuitive. One of the reasons for pursuing this designation is to help ensure this impressive lot remains intact and does not fall victim to future speculative development. I'm sure you'd agree that a stunning residence should stay connected to its stunning site. This residence has garnered much attention since it was built in 1955, first appearing in a 1956 article in Palm Springs Villager magazine, and then again many times throughout the late 50s and early 60s, on a 1970s postcard, and in California Design magazine just a few years ago. During Modernism Week, the Holden residence was featured twice by KMIR News as an example of the modernist architecture for which Palm Springs is so well known. In short, this residence has been a good ambassador for Palm Springs. While we appreciate Councilmember Coors and Mayor Moon's recent positive comments about PSPF's nominations, many folks collaborate in these efforts. Architect Jim Harlan and preservation architect Susan Sequoy Jensen kindly reviewed this nomination and gave us feedback. Architect Hugh Captor graciously agreed to be interviewed and answered questions about builder Joe Pauling. The Historical Society staff provided invaluable assistance and access to historical records. Orange Coast Title donated their services because they believe these nominations serve an important community cause, and the city's planning and building departments are always helpful. In short, many are involved in bringing these nominations before you. We saw the council struggle last November with the Crocker Bank designation because a city-paid expert reported the building was so profoundly compromised that designation was inappropriate. But Councilmember Roberts eloquently explained how these designations serve the community in many ways, and he's right. There is virtually no downside to historic designation. It stirs reinvestment, gives the city input into future changes, and recognizes the efforts of those who created our city's built environment. While the Holden residence certainly does not have the integrity issues of the Crocker Bank building, the principle still applies. The Garrisons will invest in and improve this property. Granting historic Class 1 designation to the Holden Deepwell residents would further the purpose of historic preservation, to quote the staff report, by ensuring long-term proper care and maintenance of a unique custom-built home from the mid-century era that was owned by a person of significance and helps educate and inform the citizens about this important period in the development of Palm Springs. Thank you. To answer the question about the roof line, it's just a fascia, and the difference in the angles of the photograph, the dark paint against the white paint, the roof line is the original roof line.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Oh, by the way, with the system the way it is now, if someone's doing 5 minutes, I don't have a 5-minute button. I have to do a 2-minute button and a 3-minute button. So if someone's doing a public hearing and you hear the chime go off at 2 minutes, keep going because I'm going to give you another 3 minutes. Okay. Next speaker is Jane Garrison. We have 2 minutes.
Mayor, council members, Jane Garrison. My husband and I are the now owners of this home, and I just want to address a few issues. Councilman Roberts, we did not see the home prior to the renovations, but from every person we spoke to in the neighborhood, realtors, architects who went through, they said their biggest concern when the previous owners bought the home was that they were going to knock it down and build 4 homes on that beautiful property. So although the finishes are different, the architecture was actually returned to its original footprint. All of the posts and beams are original, the tongue and groove ceilings are original, the fireplace is original, the pool is original. So I'm incredibly grateful that they didn't knock it down because it was in very big disrepair. We support this, and actually in buying this home, my husband and I made 3 commitments. Number 1 was that we will make sure that this house is always maintained, and not just the home, but the land. Our biggest fear is when we're all long gone, we don't want someone to put up a fence and sell off the back 2 lots and change this whole site. Secondly, is we made the commitment to go through and support the historic site designation with the land included, which I know a lot of homeowners don't. And lastly, as good stewards of this property and people who, as you all know, love this community so much, we feel as good stewards of a Class 1 historic site, it's not just for us, but it's for the community. And we've made a commitment to allow nonprofits to use our home and our property. We already opened it up for the Retro Martini Party, which had almost 400 people. And last week we were approached about hosting the HRC Garden Party in November, which we are thrilled to agree to host that. We'll host that as well. So this property we feel needs to be protected. It needs to make sure that in the future, no one knocks it down, no one changes it in the wrong way. We will maintain it, and we want to share it with our community. So for all those reasons, we are in support of this designation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Garrison. We have any other speakers, Mr. City Clerk? No?
Only Ron Marshall, but that's only if...
I'll rebuttal. Does the applicant wish to have 2 minutes of rebuttal? Okay, seeing none, we will close the public comments. And now for staff comments, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very, very grateful that the property wasn't raised and that they ensure that the property is going to stay intact. This is once was especially a very, very beautiful home and very important architecturally. I am disappointed that when the original restoration was done on this house, they weren't more sensitive to the elements that did exist. I did see this house beforehand, and it certainly was in a state of decay, but frankly, and again, I don't mean to insult the house because I think it's beautiful today as it was then, but it's virtually a new house. It could have been built yesterday. And so, you know, I will support the designation, but I have to say in this case, it's a little bit of a stretch for me. You know, these designations are great on many levels, but they're especially great for homeowners because it gives them the opportunity to file for the Mills Act, which is a significant cost savings in taxes. And the Mills Act is designed specifically for people to have the money to maintain their older homes. In this case, this is no longer an older home. This house has clearly been gutted to its studs and rebuilt, and will probably be in great condition for the next 50 years. But, you know, on the fact alone that the parcels were kept intact and they were combined, and, you know, some of the, you know, the original post and beam construction is still in place, I'm going to support it. But I did want to say that I'm a little disappointed in the level of modernization that occurred here. Unless, I think, walking through this house, unless you were told that this house had a history, you really wouldn't know. It could be a magnificent new house. And architecturally, that's a nod to the original architect. It's just too bad you can't really see in any of the finishes or what originally existed here. But with that, I will still gladly support this designation.
Okay, I'd like to comment. You know, we talked tonight about Modernism Week, and I know I was able to go to the Retro Martini party for this, but only because I got online and within the first few minutes I bought a ticket before it sold out. I mean, this is the kind of home that people come from all over the world to see because it is so reminiscent of what was our mid-century architecture. And granted, but this house is 63 years old, and like all of us who are 63, we need a little, or I'm 68, I need a little bit of maintenance once in a while. And I know my house is in Alexander, was built in 1959, and when we bought it, we had to undo a lot of remodeling ourselves. But a lot of that stuff came off. And also, we recently replaced our aluminum windows in the front, and we had to go through a lot of torture from City Hall to get the permits and get it all permitted. And it costs like $1,500 for permits, I mean, just for a few windows. So I can see where some people sometimes do things that aren't exactly original because it's very difficult to get it back to the exact original. And there's more efficient windows and things and doors, like the pivoting doors. As I went through it, it looked to me like, and looking at the photos, it looks like the doors are in the same place. They just put these more modern type of swivel doors instead of the old-fashioned sliding doors, and they're probably more efficient than those 1963 doors. Yeah, and also, as I was reading this, you know, things, I can see where the things that non-contributing, things like the landscaping, it can be changed. The water feature at the front door, and the garage door carport, which was done in done 55 years ago. Wall sconce lighting fixtures. The only thing I can see which could be a little difficult to restore is the smooth stucco finish, but I don't think that's a huge issue. And so I really strongly support this. The house is stunning, and it is a beautiful example of the style of the homes that made Palm Springs famous. And there's only 2 of these houses remaining in the Deep Well neighborhood, and the other one is also historic. So I think it's really critical that we preserve these 2 homes. Councilmember Holstage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also have a hard time with this one. I actually I lived near this home for a few years, and I walked my dog by it every single day. I think it's a beautiful home. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite home in Palm Springs. It's very beautiful. I walked by it every day when it was being gutted. So I saw it before. I saw the huge amount of things that were changed and that were taken out. I saw the pool fixture that was added in the front there, and I watch it now. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful building. I think it might be architecturally significant and historic also in 50 years as part of our revitalization of the mid-century modern with modern elements that we see happening. A lot of homes in Deep Well are that way, and I've watched that change too. It's a beautiful lot, and I really was moved by a lot of the owner's comments about retaining the property and retaining it all together there, and how important that is for our community. So I'm not an architectural historian. I defer to my council members and the staff report and a lot of the really hard work that went into this. But I do have some concerns about looking at the different elements, evaluation, criteria and looking at which are met, and a lot of them are borderline to me, and I do have concerns just about how intact this property still is because of all the renovations. Thank you.
Councilmember Middleton.
Yes, I share some of the concerns of my colleagues, but I'm going to support this designation. This home is absolutely stunningly beautiful. It is incredibly important that we preserve the property intact, and I know it is not a criteria for designation, but I will certainly say I deeply appreciate the commitment of Mr. and Mrs. Garrison to the community and the manner in which they have opened this home up to nonprofit organizations in our city. And on a biased note, I'm really proud that it's in the south end of Palm Springs.
Councilmember Coors.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I did want to, just as we look at this in our sort of quasi-judicial role, just note that while I share some of the concerns about the changes, I do believe ultimately it meets criterion 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that is why I am going to support this.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Motion to approve made by Councilmember Coors, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Roberts. Motion is on the floor.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. Next item, public hearing item 2C. Okay. Rosian v. LLC for a plan development district application, a minor architectural application, conditional use permit applications, and a variance application proposing renovations and additions to an existing 62-room hotel to add an outdoor music venue, an outdoor restaurant use, an outdoor cocktail lounge use, and support spaces at the Monroe Hotel, also known as Infusion Beach Hotel, located at 1900 North Palm Canyon Drive, case 5.1409. Okay, do we have a staff report, please?
Mr. Mayor and members of council, you have quite an extensive backup materials in your packet, 400 pages plus. So I will just go through a presentation to summarize the applications, what's being asked by the applicant. I also want to go through the environmental review that we did and then talk about the recommendations of the Planning Commission relative to this application. First of all, in terms of what the applicant is requesting, they are asking to add the following uses to the existing Monroe Hotel property. There will be no changes to the hotel itself. It will still remain as a hotel with 62 rooms, but they would like to add a restaurant use. This will be an outdoor restaurant. Also, they are proposing bar service. So in our zoning code, that's called a cocktail lounge. That's another one of the uses that they'd propose to add. And then with that, in the outdoor area, they would like to have music. And these are the hours that they're proposing to do it and the types of music. From Monday to Thursday until 12 a.m., they're proposing to have ambient music. And by ambient, what that means is it's background music so that you and I could have a conversation in the area and be able to hear each other while there is background music. On Friday through Sunday, from 1 p.m. until 10 p.m., they're asking to have amplified music. And then after 10 p.m., Friday through Sunday, it would go back to being ambient music until 2 a.m. One of the things that I want to point out is this application does not request, nor are we asking to modify the city's noise ordinance. They will still be subject to the noise ordinance at the perimeter of their property. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that as we get into the environmental factors that we've analyzed. In terms of the applications, there's 4 applications associated with this request. Number 1 is they need a conditional use permit for the restaurant, the cocktail lounge, and the outdoor music. Secondly, they need a minor architectural application for the new structures that they're proposing. That includes the 400 square foot, 1-story kitchen building, the outdoor bar, which is an uncovered bar, and then the other site improvements, including the new wall at the west side of the property, which will be 9 feet in height when it's completed. Also, certain landscaping improvements and other general improvements to the property. Third, they need a variance for the location of their off-site parking lot. To accommodate the additional use here on the property, they need to provide additional parking spaces. The lot that they've located is at the Dinks property, which is at the corner of North Indian Canyon and Via Escuela. The code requires off-site parking to be within 300 feet of the site that it serves. This site is 360 feet away, and so consequently a variance is needed. Finally, they're requesting approval of a planned development district for certain waivers that they're seeking from development standards. And those waivers include the following. Number one, they're requesting a reduction in the side yard setback on the south side of the property for the kitchen building and for the cabanas that will be adjacent to the pool area. For a hotel use in a C1 zoning district, it requires a 10-foot side yard setback. They're proposing to locate those buildings directly on the property line. Secondly, they're requesting a reduction in the open space. Currently, there is 43% open space on the site. With the addition of the new kitchen building and the bar building, that will decrease it to 41%. And then finally, because all of the off-street parking requires the use of a valet parking system, they are requesting to include that as part of the planned development district and waiver from standards. In terms of the site plan, and I apologize that these line drawings may be a little bit difficult for you to read, the drawing on the left is the existing conditions showing the hotel buildings, the parking lot, and the swimming pool area. And then on the right, I've indicated the new buildings and changes to the site plan. You'll notice the new kitchen building located to the far right, the outdoor bar area, the cabanas that are located along the property line, and then the new wall at the front of the property, and then also they have a raised platform or stage area there at the front of the property facing North Palm Canyon. These are the illustrations of the exterior. This is the perimeter wall on North Palm Canyon. The wall details, as well as the buildings that they're proposing interior to the site, have been reviewed by the AAC and the Planning Commission. A lot of concern was paid to the details and materials of the exterior wall. This is a view looking towards the west of the pool area, showing the cabanas there on the left and the improvements to the pool area. This is a view looking back to the east. The kitchen building will be hidden more or less behind a ficus screen. You see the pool area with tables there to the left that will provide the restaurant service or the dining area for the restaurant. In terms of the off-site parking lot, as I had mentioned, the off-site parking lot will be the former Dinks location at 2080 North Palm Canyon, and you can see that relative to the Monroe Hotel or Infusion Beach property there on the bottom part of the screen. In terms of the valet parking system, how it will work is patrons will pull into the Monroe Hotel property. From there, the valet parking staff will make a right-hand turn onto North Palm Canyon, take a right on Via Escuela, pull into the Dinks parking lot. And then as they're bringing the cars back, again, they'll be using right turns only, exiting onto Via Escuela, coming down North Indian Canyon, and then entering the back of the hotel property. As I had mentioned, this will require 100% valet service, and so this is how the cars will be stacked on the Dinks property. This allows them to stack 158 cars. Again, there are quite a few tandem spaces, and that's why it requires the valet parking plan. Let me go briefly into the environmental analysis that was done. Because of the potential for impacts to not only traffic, but also noise from the outdoor sound system, we had a consultant engaged to analyze those impacts. There are two primary mitigation measures which are included in the conditions of approval from that environmental analysis. Number one, there needs to be a long-term lease for the parking. That is because we are adding additional uses to the Monroe Hotel property, and so we need to guarantee that there is parking available to serve those additional uses. The applicant has provided us with a 10-year lease that meets our qualifications for a long-term lease, and so that guarantees that we will have that in place. Secondly, in terms of the outdoor music, there are mitigation measures relative to that. It requires that a long-term noise monitoring system be provided on site. They also have an option of having a sound limiter on the system itself, so that would keep it within the city's noise ordinance. So the mitigation measures allows one or the other. When the Planning Commission reviewed this, they were very concerned about the impact of the outdoor music on adjacent residents. Looking at the nearest residents to the site, we have the condominiums that are located on North Palm Canyon at Tangerine Court. Those are approximately 350 feet away from the property. We also have the new condominiums that are being developed near the Riviera, 64 at the Riv. Those are approximately 75 feet away from the property. Going just a little bit further out, we have single-family residences at Captor Court off of Vista Chino that are about 650 feet away. We also have the Indian Canyon Gardens condominiums at North Indian Canyon and Villa Escuela that are about 600 feet away. As you get a little bit further out, 700 feet away, you encounter more residential units there. So again, Planning Commission was concerned with those impacts, and that was a focus of the many meetings that they had on this project. In total, the Planning Commission held 4 public hearings on this matter, going in depth on the details of the impacts, including 1 study session. I'd like to discuss some of the key added conditions. There was quite a list of conditions that the Planning Commission added, but I'm just going to focus on some of the key conditions relative to the impacts. Number 1, they limited the capacity of the outdoor uses there at the Monroe Hotel property so that there are enough parking spaces both on the hotel property and with the valet parking at the Dink site to accommodate not only the added uses at the hotel, but also retenanting of the Dinks building as well. So we can accommodate uses at Dinks in addition to the additional uses at the hotel with a valet parking plan for both. But we do need to limit the capacity on the Monroe property to 210 patrons total. Secondly, in terms of the noise and the mitigation measures that are proposed, not only do they want the long-term monitoring system on the property, they also want the second mitigation measure, the sound level limiter on the system, and then they added an additional condition that there be no subwoofers on the amplification system. Their concern was that while we may adhere to the noise ordinance at the perimeter of the property, many times it's the vibrations from the base that residents feel. And so for that reason, the Planning Commission added an additional condition restricting the use of subwoofers. Relative to the parking, the Planning Commission felt it was important that there be no charge for the valet parking so as to discourage parking in adjacent residential neighborhoods. And so that remains as a condition of approval, that the valet parking for the property must be free of charge. And then also the Planning Commission wanted to make sure that there was review if this use is approved. And so the Planning Commission would request to review this at 6 months and at 1 year after operations begin, so as to evaluate the impacts from the noise and the parking and the traffic. Because this is a planned development district application, it requires public benefit in accordance with the City Council's 2009 policy. There were many different things discussed relative to public benefit. I'll skip to the summary of that, and that's the Planning Commission recommendation that the applicant donate $50,000 to the city's sidewalk gap infill project in order to do pedestrian improvements geared towards pedestrian safety in the immediate area of the property. The applicant has submitted a letter to you, which is at the very back of your 400-page backup materials, that they have issues that they want to address the council on relative to 2 of those conditions that the Planning Commission has imposed. One is relative to the public benefit, and then the other is relative to the conditions about the outdoor music system. With that, that concludes my presentation to you. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. The applicant is also here to address your questions as well.
Okay, questions of staff prior to going to public hearing. Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Director Fagg. It looks to me like between staff and boards and commissions, this has been thoroughly vetted. In fact, I find very little problem with the PDD and the minor variations that they're asking for and so forth. It really falls on two concerns for me, and I struggle with them. So this lease with Dinks, this 10-year lease, what happens in 10 years?
Sorry. After 10 years, what we would need to do is reevaluate the conditional use permits that they have been granted. So if there is not parking to serve those additional uses on the property, we would either have to terminate the conditional use permits, or the applicant would need to seek additional off-site parking to satisfy those uses. So that's what would happen when the lease expires in 10 years. If the lease is extended, then obviously we can continue to extend the conditional use permits, but otherwise we would need to terminate those or revoke them.
So have we ever revoked a CUP in a situation like this, Dr. Reddy, in your time with the city?
Maybe you can help me with that, Flynn.
I should have called and asked that question because that's a
Yeah,
pop-up quiz question, but I guess I'm trying to make more of a point than ask a question. I'm very concerned about the concept of revoking a CUP on what will be most likely, if it's anything like our other new hotels, will be hugely successful. So it seems counterproductive to me to just even the ghost of a concept of in 10 years revoking their CUP, which would probably destroy their success. So that to me doesn't really seem like an option that can be a possibility here. But I have grave concerns about them using parking behind another business that has the potential to be very, very successful. We haven't seen it with that business with Dinks yet, but Dinks is a brand new building and really just needs the right use to have it work. That's all that's missing there. This isn't an empty lot. This is a real restaurant which has a great potential. So,
Councilman, the one example that was close to this that we did was 849, where they have valet parking off-site sort of around at St. Paul's Church. So that was one that was sort of similar to this in terms of it was off-site.
And thank you, Dr. Reddy. I recognize that we do this sort of thing, but Dinks is not a church. You know, a church is not going to be having, the potential of being a major restaurant or discotheque at night. You know, basically, most churches are, not going to have that kind of use or that kind of or any kind of a use that's going to require, consistent large parking requirements. So a church would seem a perfect use, particularly for nighttime uses, for additional parking. I'm a little worried about Dinks. I think it's not if, it's when Dinks reopens as a new place. So I really do have a lot of concerns about this parking. At the same time, I don't want to kill the concept. I just have real concerns there. I don't have problems with the side yard issue because I was originally worried about the smells and sounds coming from the kitchens, but being that all just backs up to the far end parking lot of Billy Reed's, I don't see a problem there. My issue is that I'm not really comfortable with this parking issue. My other issue is the sound. And, having served on the Planning Commission numerous times in my life, we often asked for things to come back. The most recent example of that was the, what was the restaurant called that was shut down? The
Hacienda.
The Hacienda. And I remember that in order to approve the Hacienda's sound system, we had it come back to the Planning Commission, and there were mixed results with that. And that we thought we tried everything, but I remember when it did come back, there were complaints that came back with it. So I have some real concern about sound, but maybe it's covered in the monitoring, and maybe it's covered in coming back. I guess what I'm most concerned about here, and I'm looking for answers on, the long-term, this parking and the sound issues, and I'm not worried about them now, I'm worried about them down the line. Years from now, when everybody's forgotten about this meeting and forgotten about the rules that we put in place, what will occur there? And how will we really be able to monitor it 10 years from now and make sure that we haven't created a noise disaster? And I'm not worried about their day-to-day noise either. I'm not worried about their day-to-day music. What I'm worried about is we are a real party town. And, you know, now we have so many events coming to town, and these hotels are packed, and we have White Party and Dinah and all of these things where these hotels start rocking. And I know the Riviera can be exceptionally loud because I live close to it. And you can feel the vibration in the streets. And I know they're in all sorts of violation, but I just, it doesn't seem like a lot happens about it. So I know I said a lot, but my real concerns come down to the noise and the parking.
And Mayor Pro Tem, we shared those same concerns in terms of the off-site parking. When you expand uses on a property without having the parking available there on the property, it's always a concern. And so again, we hope that through the conditions that we've applied to this project, that will help to address that. I forgot to mention, in terms of the concerns about noise, we do have the city's CEQA consultant here who can address the mitigation measures and would also be able to answer any questions you might have about those mitigation measures and the noise.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to that. And I will just finally say on the parking, I think the requirement should simply be, and if we're going to have a 10-year lease on that parking, that they simply need to find new parking in 10 years. That after 10 years, I'm even worried about a release. Or releasing of that parking. I'm very worried about the day Dinks reopens and the parking conflicts that we can have between these two uses. Thank you.
Just as a matter of procedure, could I request that we keep this portion to questions of staff and keep comments and concerns for after we hear the public comments, because I think that might be more appropriate.
Well, Mayor, the reason I bring up my concerns is simply because I'm looking for responses on my concerns. So
you're going to do what you want to do anyway. I'm just saying this portion is supposed to be for questions of staff, and then after we hear the comments of the applicant and the public, then I think that's a good time for us to express our comments and concerns. Okay, Councilmember Coors.
Great, thank you. Two areas of questions, one on parking and one on something else. So on parking, and I saw in the staff report that it's believed that there's enough parking for both this project with its new uses and Dinks if Dinks were to reopen. Can you just explain for both us but the public how we calculate the number of parking spots that are needed for these uses and when the last time we did that calculation?
Yes, absolutely. I'll go to that. On page 9 of your backup materials in the staff report, we do have a table with the parking calculations there. Going through what parking is required for the hotel use, for the 62-room hotel, 59 parking spaces are required, which are available on the immediate property. For the addition of the restaurant and the cocktail lounge use, based on the Planning Commission limiting the occupancy to 210 persons, we have a ratio of 1 parking space for every 3 seats. And so that's how the parking is calculated for that. So that results in a requirement for 70 parking spaces for the restaurant and cocktail lounge use. Then in the Dinks building, it's based on the square footage that's available for the public as a restaurant use. And so that would require 69 spaces. If you add all of that up, that comes to a total of 198 spaces. With the valet parking plan, I believe that there's a total of 217 spaces available. So that gives us just a little bit of a cushion. So if we need additional spaces for employees or any other thing available there on the site, that we've got a little bit of a cushion there in terms of the total number of spaces. But again, it does have to be all valet parking because there are tandem spaces.
Right. In the case of Dinks, right, which could be used as purely as a club or a restaurant club mix as it was, we do it purely based on square footage?
We do either on square footage or else on the number of seats. Our code allows us to do either one, but the parking comes out essentially about the same.
Okay. And when was the last time we sort of made those rules for parking?
Much before my time. I couldn't begin to estimate when we adopted those parking standards.
So, it would be good to know that because we are in a different world now with ride-sharing companies, et cetera, and we probably see less parking needed as time goes on than more. And so updating those, because that's one of the things that struck me in reading this. The second thing is on the public benefit. My understanding was the Planning Commission initially wanted to put $50,000 into an affordable housing fund, but at the time, staff was unaware if we had an account for that, and since that time, I've spoken to the city manager and city attorney who said, we actually can do that. Is that, I just want to confirm that.
Yes.
Okay. And then we can discuss that when the time comes. Thank you.
Councilmember Middleton.
Flynn, I know there were a number of meetings that the Planning Commission had on this project, and you did a very nice job of summarizing the conclusions of the Planning Commission. Could you elaborate a little bit on what the original requests were to the Planning Commission, and in terms of number of people who would be occupying parking plans, and how they came to the conclusions that they came to?
I'm going to apologize because the application has changed a number of times since it was originally submitted to staff back in early 2017. I believe when it first came in, and this was before the Planning Commission saw it, I believe that they were requesting to have up to 800 people there for special events at the property. It was cut back once it got through the Architectural Advisory Committee and made its way to Planning Commission. And I can't remember what the number was that Planning Commission originally saw. But again, based on the number of available spaces, Planning Commission made the condition that it be limited to 210 patrons because we could park that. And so they had requested more, but the Planning Commission did cut that back.
Thank you.
Councilmember Holstage.
Thank you. The major question that I have is that my understanding of the staff report was that the applicant could have, for the noise attenuation measures, so I'm looking at page 48 of the staff report, and this is for the conditions of approval in Exhibit A. And so it says, number 16, and then A, install a long-term noise monitoring system. And then at B on page 49, it says, in addition to the permanent noise monitoring solution, a sound level limiter. But my understanding from the staff report that that was an either-or situation. Then I made it to page 420 with the applicant, and they also asked for the applicant's letter. Thank goodness I made it all that way. And they were asking relief. So can you explain all the different levels of mitigation for noise and what the Planning Commission's recommendation was on that?
Certainly. In terms of the mitigation measures that were prepared by the city's consultant, it was an either-or situation. And the mitigation measures are on page 101 of your backup materials. And it says, install a long-term noise monitoring station. That was option A. And then option B says, as an alternative to a permanent noise monitoring solution, a sound level limiter shall be installed. So in the mitigation measures, it was an either-or. However, because the Planning Commission was so concerned about the impacts to adjacent residential properties, they went for both. They want to see both of those in place. So to use a metaphor, this is the belt and suspenders approach, that they want to see both of those added to the conditions of approval. Now, the Planning Commission went one step further, and because of their concerns about bass, they said no subwoofers. So that's in addition to the mitigation measures.
What type of mitigation requirements have we made for other venues that might have outdoor music? I know the Arrive Hotel and the Ace were mentioned in the reports.
We have not been as stringent as we have been in this case. Because of complaints that we've had on previous properties about the impacts of noise, we actually did the environmental analysis here to develop mitigation measures. That's something that we didn't have in place on the Hacienda, for example, when it was in operation. Other properties, again, we've placed certain conditions that they have to adhere to the city's noise ordinance, but we haven't had the strength of the mitigation measures that we have proposed for this application.
I guess I'm asking, is it typical to require both the belt and the suspenders? Have we done that before?
We have not done that before.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a few other questions for you. If people do use street parking, I noticed that 30-somethings are the target market for this property and venue. And sometimes we don't want to use valet because even if it doesn't cost, you might have to tip. And so I'm wondering, and it costs then to use valet for us. So I'm wondering if people do use street parking instead, where they would park and the impact to those neighborhoods.
This was one of the difficult discussions that we had at the Planning Commission. There isn't the ability of the city to police who parks on public streets. It's difficult to identify, who the individual is and what business they're patronizing. The Planning Commission did ask that the applicant post a sign saying that parking on residential streets is forbidden. But again, it's very difficult for the city to enforce that, so we really don't have the ability to do that. And that's one of the reasons why they did require the valet parking to be free, is to encourage people to use the parking spaces that are allocated for these uses.
How close are nearby neighborhoods where people could freely park? I don't think there are many.
As you look at the area map, there really is not parking available on either North Palm Canyon or North Indian Canyon.
Right.
So you have to get approximately 2 blocks away before you find available on-street parking spaces. That also raises concerns of pedestrian safety in crossing the major streets to get to the property. And so that's why their recommendation on public benefit was to also have things in place to address that.
Thank you. And I also saw that one proposed public benefit in the Planning Commission discussions was installing a crosswalk on Palm Canyon so that people could easily get to the venue and back. Can you explain or any justification why the Planning Commission set the public benefit as the fill-in for sidewalk gaps versus the other ideas?
Because North Palm Canyon in this location is a state highway, it becomes a little bit difficult for us to do crossings wherever we feel it might be appropriate. We do have the crossing at Vista Chino and North Palm Canyon. There is also funded, and I believe it's designed, a pedestrian crossing at Via Escuela and North Palm Canyon, which is very much needed in that area. But doing some type of a mid-block crossing ultimately would not be approved by Caltrans, and so consequently we had to go to the next available option with pedestrian improvements where we could.
Thank you. I remember that being an issue for the hacienda because it was so dark there. My last question is on page 12, for example, it says the location of the food preparation kitchen proposes a reduction of a side yard setback from 10 feet to 0, and I'm not familiar, and I'm wondering if a 0-foot setback is a safety hazard or a problem at all, or what the recommendation was on that.
No, it's kind of unusual in our zoning code that in the C1 zoning district, commercial uses such as retail or office could build on the property line. However, there is an exclusion for hotels or residential that they have to have additional setbacks. Again, that's kind of unusual in a zoning code, but that's the way that our zoning code is. In terms of complying with building code requirements, there's certain requirements in terms of fire separation when you build on a property line, but it is something that you can do, so it's not an issue from a safety standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just a quick question. One is on the drawing on page 140, on page 363, shows a diagram, and there isn't much in the write-up that I could find on the size of the stage, but it looks like the stage, of course, there is at the west wall, against the west wall, and it looks fairly large. Do you know what the size of that stage is? It looks like it's almost as big as the pool, which is 600 square feet.
Unfortunately, I don't have the dimensions of the stage. We might ask the applicant to address that as part of their presentation.
Okay, but do you think this drawing is probably fairly accurate as far as the size?
Excuse me?
Do you think this drawing here with the stage is probably to scale?
Yes, I believe it is to scale.
Okay, the other quick question is, I noticed on page 49, towards just before paragraph B, it says, in the event of a noise complaint, the project applicant shall provide noise level measurement data to the City of Palm Springs Planning Services Department for the event during which the complaint was made, including daytime, evening, and nighttime hourly noise level data to demonstrate whether the noise levels exceeded the on-site noise level limit. The data shall be provided to the city by the applicant immediately for review at the city's discretion. Is this normal that hotels report take their own noise level and report them to the city after the complaint was made?
No, that isn't normal, and that's part of the fact that they would be required to install a long-term noise monitoring station. And so that noise monitoring station would record the data, and we would ask that they forward that data to us to review. That's not something that we have in place in other properties currently. And again, this is with the more stringent mitigation measures that are being proposed with this use.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of staff before we open this public hearing? We will open it to public hearing. The applicant has 5 minutes to present their case, and if requested, will have 2 minutes available for rebuttal. And again, as I explained, I don't have a 5-minute button, so I'm going to give you 2, and then when you hear the first ding, ignore it. Then keep going for 3 more. Okay, so our first speaker, I don't have your name on here, but please identify yourself, and you may start.
I'm Matthew Rogers, the project manager. Thank you all for your consideration, attention, in dealing with the Infusion Beach project. This has been a long and arduous process, to say the least. There's no doubt that the original proposed project across the street has evolved to where we are today. We have done our best to mold a business model around the wants and desires of the Planning Commission and what they feel would best serve the residents and visitors of Palm Springs. We appreciate their favorable recommendations. The misconceptions about the project are abundant. We are not Hacienda, we are not Golden Voice. We're a hotel with the hopes of adding a food and beverage component that will give our guests a different atmosphere and environment to enjoy their time in Palm Springs. The fact is, the economic realities of the North End make it extremely difficult for a hotel to survive without a food and beverage component, as apparent with many surrounding properties. What we are proposing today further drives traffic and injects life into our entire block, the North End, and the gateway to our city. We invite the members of the council to ask any questions that will help them better understand our business model and who we are. A vote for this project is a vote to support the North End. A vote for this project is a vote to support the other businesses of the North End. A vote for this project is a vote to support economic vitality of the North End. I also wanted to address the letter that was sent about the conditions of approval. The first is the mitigation measures that the Planning Commission has conditioned the project with. Urban Crossroads, the independent acoustical engineering firm who performed the noise study for the CEQA report, has recommended the 2 mitigation measures as you have spoken about. The measures are to install the noise limiter or to install the long-term noise monitoring system. The Planning Commission has conditioned the project to install both of these mitigation measures, as well as removing the subwoofer, as well as installing a noise limiter on the subwoofer, which is not in the system. The letter is requesting that the council remove the conditions of a noise monitoring system, as well as the limiter on the subwoofer that will not be in the system. The noise monitoring system is something that the City Council has never conditioned a project with before. Details and intricacies of a system like this would be an operational nightmare. The proposed location is alongside Highway 111, which will cause validity problems. When alarms are tripped, consultants will have to be hired to determine the origination of the sounds to set the alarm off. The second part of the letter pertains to the public benefit of the project. We feel the development standards we are asking to deviate from are minimal, as staff has agreed. The public benefit we are proposing is the project itself, as well as a $35,000 cash donation to improvements. We feel that this development will impact the North End and gateway to our city tremendously. Our group does have control and plans to file a CUP of the former Dinks location by the end of 2018. We also plan to purchase that building. We have an option in the lease to purchase the building. So not only do we have control of the parking lot, but we also have control of the entire building. No one else can go in the building. No one else can use it. It is completely on us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We only have one speaker, City Clerk? Okay, our first speaker is Aftab Dada. Mr. Dada, you will have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm back again as President of the Palm Springs Hospitality Association, as well as the GM's morning breakfast we had today. Both the boards have unanimously approved supporting this project that we badly need on the north side of Vista Chino. And I feel it, and my colleagues all feel it, that the addition of the food and beverage component will be a very successful stuff in that part of the town, because as you know it, currently we don't have any hotel or motel that have the food and beverage component. So I would like for all of you and urge you to please approve this project. I had the pleasure of visiting the property a few days ago, and some of the job they have done with adding those beautiful cabanas and the concrete area and the staging, as well as the bar they are building. And also Matthew showed me the location of the kitchen. So having valet parking and alternate transportation now available, I don't feel parking will be an issue for this project. So thank you again, and hopefully you'll approve this project. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dada. Any other speakers? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Okay, council members, Mayor Pro Tem.
So I have a few questions. Flynn, there's a very large hotel restoration remodel going on across the street next to Rick's. Can you tell us about that and where that is in the process and what they're proposing?
Certainly. That property is called the Tova Hotel Project. It was approved by Planning Commission, I believe, back in 2016. What they are doing is they're renovating the property. They are actually decreasing the number of hotel rooms. I believe they had 110. They're going down to about 100 rooms. And they're adding a brand new pool component to that, a spa component. They had originally proposed to do a restaurant but didn't have on-site parking available, and so consequently they have put that portion of it off. The project is unfortunately much like the rail project, dependent on EB5 funding. However, in a recent meeting with the applicant, they had indicated that they do intend to begin their renovation project within about the next 60 to 90 days. So that property is intended to start redevelopment here shortly in the near future.
So they're not proposing any live music or anything around their pool?
No, they are not.
Okay. For the applicant, how are you planning to monitor if the Planning Commission has added the condition that you can't have more than 210 patrons on site? How do you plan to monitor that?
We will have security at the hotel and on the floor during all operational hours. So we would monitor it that way.
Okay, and roll back for me. You say that you are now holding a 10-year lease on the entire Dinks property, including the building?
Correct.
And what do you intend to use with the building, to use the building itself for?
We intend to open up a cocktail lounge, file for a CUP for a cocktail lounge.
For a cocktail lounge there.
Correct. We have a purchase, or an option to purchase after 18 months.
An option, but
Correct.
it's, okay, so you've purchased an option from them, okay. But if nothing else, whether you take that option or not, you have a solid 10-year lease?
Yeah, and our intentions are is if this place is successful, I mean, that is our option for parking, so we will 100% take it.
Okay, thank you so much. Flynn, in a situation like this where they're using off-site parking under a lease, do you require that lease, to see that lease? Does staff actually look into that?
Yes, absolutely. And that is one of the conditions in the mitigation measures, that we have a copy of the lease in our file.
And in the termination, if there is any sort of a termination on that lease, or the building's sold, or there's a problem with that lease, do they instantly lose their CUP if they can't prove that they've replaced that parking?
We actually need to go through a revocation process, so we need to do it at a public hearing.
Okay, and how would we know? How would we know if something happened there between the hotel and Dink's ownership?
The commitment for the leased parking spaces is something that has to be recorded with the county. So it actually requires the recording of the lease with the county, and that's one of the ways.
We'd know. You'd be triggered on that.
Yes.
Okay. I very much share Councilwoman Holstedge's concern about the parking. I'm a little bit concerned about the Dink's use and the other use combining for two events. If you had an event going on at the Dink's building and you had an event going on at the hotel, I worry that we're going to have parking problems. And Christy, I think what's going to happen is, I don't think we have a neighborhood problem here, residential, but I think what's going to happen is there's large hotel and restaurant parking lots all around this. I think and by the way, I share the concern that you do about valet. And I don't even like using valets, and not because I mind paying for them or the tip. I don't use them because I don't like giving my car up, and more importantly, I don't like waiting for it at an event. So I will often not use them. And so I think I'm not alone in that. And then on your suggestion that millennials don't even want to pay the tip, that they might overflow, or they might use other lots. So I think that's what we're going to see. And so I think what we're going to see is Billy Reed's and Rick's across the street, and potentially even the Riviera, have to now heavily monitor their parking lots to protect their parking in this situation. So I have concerns about this. I'll reserve the rest of my comments and give my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay, I have a few concerns I want to talk about. Speaking on the parking, I went down there and drove around this about 3 or 4 times to see how it worked, and it's quite a ways to go, because you have to go out right, then turn right onto Indian, then onto, I think it's Via Mira Leste, right? And then you have to turn right onto Vistachino, and that's that intersection where I believe we've had 2 fatalities, and there's a light going there soon. So it's not soon enough. So there's going to be a light there. Then there's going to be a light on Vistachino and Indian, which we know how long it takes to get through that. If there's a big line of patrons waiting for their cars, or valets waiting, the more cars, the more tips, I don't see them going around that circle on a regular basis. They're going to go left, and that is a really busy part. I mean, they're not supposed to go left to ride down there, but if they can go 100 yards by going left, they're liable to do it, and who's going to enforce that? I mean, we can't have the police down there watching that the entire time. So I'm really concerned that this valet parking is not going to work. And the accessory space, 210 people, that's a lot of people, and to me it looks like it's got a very large stage. And my concern also with the stage is the stage faces east towards residential neighborhoods. And I drove over there. There's a lot of residential neighborhoods, particularly I drove around the Riviera Villa, I think it's called, and which is smaller condos, and they're fairly much in line with it. But what's really directly in line with it is the new Rivet 64, which is going to be really nice condos, and they are right in line, because that stage is going to be it's going to have a back wall, which is going to be a little higher than normally allowed, and that back wall is going to be a reflection that's going to reflect that music right through the opening between this hotel and Billy Reed's, and it's going to go right through Riv at 64, and then right over into the condos there. And I'm just concerned we're going to remember the complaints we used to get on the Hacienda. I know they said they're not going to be the Hacienda or Golden Voice. However, when we have Splash House in, we know the complaints we get, and that's 2 weekends, in the summer, and it's the summer, so we sort of live with it. We get the emails the next day, and but this is every weekend. So I'm really concerned about it. And the Hacienda, if you really looked at it, the Hacienda didn't have any real residential neighborhoods around it except some condos fairly far away, and also the trailer park there. But yet there was tremendous number of complaints when the Hacienda was going. And that's my concern. I just don't think this is practical, and I don't think it's, you know, Palm Springs Resorts, the fact that they support this I think is great, but they're looking at revenue and business, which we have to also, but sometimes we also have to look at the residents who live in our neighborhoods. And if I bought a house at the Rivet 64, and then I found out this was across the street, all this noise was coming over there, I think I would be very upset. And also I think we're going, if I actually lived in those, that condo development there that's been there since 1980, the Riviera, I forget what it's called, I would not want this there either. Riviera Gardens, I wouldn't want this there either. So I'm trying to place myself in the position of the people who live in that neighborhood. And I have a lot of problems with this. Councilmember Coors?
I think I might have been next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because of the system now, I can't tell who's next.
I understand. Thank you. I just wanted to make my comments. I'm excited to support this project. I think it's a really important project for a blighted area in our community. I hear the concerns about noise, and it looks like 500 pages of research and 4 public meetings and a lot of work went into an investigation, went into potential noise and mitigation. And I think that the Planning Commission has come up with mitigation options for noise complaints. I actually don't have concerns about parking. I was making a comment about valet, but I agree we need to update our requirements on parking. That level of parking in the future is not going to be required. Already, my friends who go to venues like this Lyft or Uber there, and in the future, you know, we're going to have self-driving cars in 10 years that can get us there. And so I'm really not concerned about the parking, and I'm really excited to hear that you have an option on that Dinks building. And so one of my concerns was preventing development or, you know, a business being successful in that location if you're holding the parking there, but actually it sounds like that will be a good partnership. And I think that the parking calculates to what even under our very strict parking requirements are, under our outdated code, it allows for sufficient parking for both this purpose and for Dinks. And so I really don't think that, and that's an issue. Hacienda was a controversial project. It was a wildly popular concert venue. There's not a lot to do for young people in this city, and I think you're really filling a need that people will be excited about. I drove by, I peeked my head in, and for all the hoopla that I heard about the project before seeing it, I was surprised. It's a smaller pool area with really cool cabanas, a small stage area. It's really not proposing a very radical of use. And so I think that it's exciting. We need this type of development in that north end. There actually aren't, if you look at the map, that many residential areas that are going to be affected. And that's the point of bringing back a CUP in 6 months, and that we can review that at that time. I think, you know, we're a tourist town. We have tourists who like to be by the pool. We're a resort city that's known for pool parties, and I don't want that to intrude on residents' peace and quiet. But we also need to balance that with the need of providing services to both tourists and residents who want to use those types of venues and have something to do here. So I support, I'm going to vote and support this project and the variances in the CUP. I don't support having both the belt and the suspenders of a noise monitoring system. I agree with the applicant that there's a lot of problems in the noise monitoring system that's automatic because the street noise, and you look at the report that was done, it's often higher than is actually even required. So you're going to have constant feedback and constant triggers. It's going to be a nightmare. and it's an expensive and comprehensive system. And so if we haven't required it for any other projects, I don't see why we would require it here. We have similar events happening at the Riviera right there. And so I don't think that that's a large concern. I would support looking at the public benefit recommendation for staff. I support providing a public benefit into an affordable housing fund. I think that's an important purpose. I'm not that familiar with the status of the sidewalks there, so if staff would recommend that the sidewalks need more of that, then I think that I would defer to that recommendation. And I would make a recommendation to the applicant as well, and I was going to ask you, but since I'm just making comments, I'll make a comment to you that if you haven't already, it would be good to meet with the neighbors, to meet with the HOA for different neighboring communities so that we really can strike a balance to protecting those people who've lived there often for a long time and might be elderly or, have other concerns of, but also just working together as a community. And that's what we've seen in different projects and developments, that when you work with those neighbors who might be complaining, it's a really good way to just strike a balance for everyone so that you can have a successful project too. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Coors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also support this project and agree pretty much with everything Councilmember Holstage said. If we can't do this kind of project north of Vistachino between Indian and Palm Canyon, we're basically saying we can't do it anywhere in our city. And, when it comes to the noise, they're not asking for any waiver of our normal noise ordinance. So the issue is enforcement, and that we make sure the neighbors and residents know that there's a phone number for noise complaints that's on our website, and that we actually enforce it, because I think one of the concerns was we don't always do that. And so they're not asking for a waiver of that. On parking, all they're asking for is 50 feet more for the valet than what they're entitled to. And they meet the parking requirements as long as they do valet for both possible dinks use and for the hotel use. So I don't see that as a problem either. And, we are spending so much money for parking for downtown through the garage that we did on Baristo for the 1,200 spaces that taxpayers paid for. $2 million more are going for public parking by the Andes, but nothing north of Vistachino. So if we're going to say we want extra parking than what our code requires because it's somehow north of Vistachino, we're never going to get development up there. And that makes no sense to me. And I appreciate the mayor's concern that they may drive left, although once that light's in, it's going to be a lot quicker, I think, to do right, than for them to make a left. But I agree the light's not going right away, and I think that's something we'll have to watch. But I do support this. As far as the public benefit, and I think this was part of the study, but I don't think renovating a building is in itself the public benefit. That's not the goal of the ordinance. It's something in addition. And I know we're spending, $1 million, $1.5 million in Measure J funds for sidewalk gap fill-in, which is why I think the original idea from the Planning Commission of Affordable Housing Fund and something we've talked about on council would be a better fit. But I agree, if staff has a different feeling, please let us know. But I do support the project on the same terms as Councilmember Holstage.
Councilmember Middleton.
Right. I'm also going to be supporting the project, and much of that has to do with the incredibly rigorous work that the Planning Commission went through. I'm going to differ from my colleague, Councilmember Holstage, but then maybe it's just age, but I think the belt and suspenders need to be used. And this calls for a 6-month review. That's not only an opportunity for us to review what the impact of sound and the like has been, it's an opportunity for the applicant to demonstrate if there are practical issues with being able to implement the sound system that the Planning Commission is calling for. They will have an opportunity to demonstrate to the Planning Commission what they have tried to do and what those impediments have been to them. But I want to see the effort there. One of the other reasons why I am supporting this project is that it does not allow for subwoofers. And I have a little bit of experience with the hacienda in that I live approximately 1,000 to 1,500 feet from where the hacienda was. And yes, the noise ordinance was complied with, but those bass sounds travel a tremendous length. And we have within 650 feet, frankly, once you get to 1,000 feet, a number of residences that start to appear, and those bass notes would carry. So I think it's incredibly important that we do not allow subwoofers there. In terms of the noise ordinance itself, it continues to apply, and it applies at the property line. So if I'm at 64 at the Riv, if there is compliance with our noise ordinance, it is simply impossible for sound to have reached 64 at the Riv because you couldn't do it. This conversation that I'm having right now is almost illegal at the property line.
That's a whole other problem.
That's how limiting our ordinance is. So to get this sound another half a block across a busy street, I just don't think is something that's going to take place. So, and lastly, on the public benefit, as a member of the Planning Commission, I was very pleased to be pushing for public housing as being our preferred method of public benefit going forward. So if there's an opportunity practically to do this as a part of this project, I would love to see us implement it. But I also know that we could take another 40 or 50 projects providing $50,000 for sidewalk repairs, and we would still have a number of sidewalks that left in the city that needed to be repaired. And from a practical standpoint, it may be more advantageous for us simply this time to set the money aside for sidewalks, knowing that we need to have a program in place to move forward with public housing. But I'd like to hear from a little more from my colleagues on that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So I want to support this project. I'd like to see it go. I think the Planning Commission made really good calls on this. I don't want to second guess them. If they want to try a more stringent sound mitigation, I'm interested because I've been here long enough and sat on that Planning Commission to see us give shots to hotels and have it not work. And again, music in a party environment, it's really hard to control DJs. It's really hard to control music. And in as much as we are a party town and we want live music venues, and I completely support that, we have to strike a balance between its effects on its surroundings. It's never a question in my mind as if we should have a new venue or a new live music venue. There can't be enough of those. But it will always be a question in my mind about the impacts, and I think that's my job, is to look at those. It's not the fun job, but that's the job we have to do. With respect to the public benefit, when I was on the Planning Commission, the whole concept of public benefit was a little squishy. In fact, we weren't even using it when I got on the Planning Commission because in those days we were so grateful to get new development. Those were the days we would accept the project as a public benefit because we had all these empty buildings and empty lots. So we were thrilled. Things have changed a lot since then, and the Planning Commission has changed a lot in what it requires as public benefit. And I don't even know if we fully defined how to derive public benefit or what it should be. Can I ask you a question, Flynn, on that? How did the sidewalk gap infill get chosen as a public benefit? And does it relate to the area of where this is being built? In other words, are we filling in sidewalks around this project?
That was the intent of the Planning Commission, is that in the way that they worded that condition of the public benefit in terms of the donation to our Sidewalk Gap Fund, they wanted to see the funds used in the vicinity of this project. And so they wanted to look at areas that were immediately in this area rather than, South Palm Springs or, East Palm Canyon, things like that. And so again, they did want that to be in the immediate vicinity.
And you know what, that makes sense to me. And when we talked about public benefit in the past, the concept was to do public improvements or public benefits around the projects themselves, to lift up that area or to solve problems in that area. And sidewalks aren't a vanity project, they're a safety issue. And in areas where there are no sidewalks, it can be dangerous, or people avoid them because they have to walk out into the street if there's no sidewalk sometimes, because of landscape and other things that are blocking the walks. It certainly has an impact on wheelchairs. So if the Planning Commission, working with staff, decided that sidewalk infill was the right choice, I'm going to support that as well. The only thing I would, so I am going to support this, and I'm going to support the Planning Commission's recommendations on this. That's the only way I'll support this. And I'd like to see it come back in 6 months and in a year. And I'd like to see it come back for the next 5 years, once a year, just to make sure it's working. And I'm hoping that, we didn't hear from the chief on this, but I'm hoping that the police will monitor it carefully as well, so that when it comes back, the police can give us a real report on the impacts of this. Because the more information we get on new projects like this, where quiet hotels are now being converted to music venues and party venues, I think we really need to pay attention to how it's working or not working. And the only way we can do that is by monitoring. So I'd like to see it monitored once a year for the next 5 years, or just have a report come back. I don't need the owner coming back every year, but I'd like to get a report from the police department and also get a report from staff on complaints. If we're getting a lot of noise complaints, or we're getting a lot of people being hit by cars because they're crossing the street right there. So that's the, I'm pretty much saying I'm going to support it as it is, but I would like to add the monitoring. I would like to have, when I say monitoring, I would like to have it come back once a year for 5 years, just to really follow this.
Mr. Mayor, in response to that question about the monitoring, on page 43 in the conditions of approval, the monitoring requirement is condition ADM 8. Right now, it states a 6-month review and a 1-year review, and that those reviews go to the Planning Commission. If Mayor Pro Tem, as he has just discussed, would prefer those to come to City Council, we would need to modify that condition accordingly.
I would not. I trust the Planning Commission to do that. If staff or Dr. Reddy thinks it should come to us, if we need to pull this back up, I'd like you to make that call. But I fully trust the Planning Commission to do the monitoring. I know that they're good at that. I would just like to extend it for a few years if my colleagues are open to that.
Okay. I'd like to add that I can count, but I think this is a cool project, but I just can't support it. Two things. To me, the valet parking, I think, is in a congested area of high-speed traffic is going to be a problem. And we're talking about today, not 10 years from now, when all these Jetson cars or self-driving are buzzing around Palm Springs. And also the noise. We can put in all this stuff and say, like Mayor Pro Tem said, with disc jockeys and stuff, you never know what they're going to do. And I think this is going to be a problem. And as Councilmember Holsage says, this is a resort town, true, and it is a party town, but it's also a residential town. We have a lot of people who live here, and I drove around that place and looked at the homes there, and they're smaller homes. They're condos, and they're probably a lot of people who are seasonal, or they're here during the high party season, and they deserve some enjoyment in their neighborhood. And yes, we've got the downtown that's booming, that's got all these places that make a lot of noise, but that's for downtown. This is a very heavily residential area, and for that reason, I just can't afford this. And I'd also like to comment that before we start a practice of putting money like tonight into affordable housing, which is something we do need to do, I think we have to have a program in place first. It's a little premature for that because, we don't want to get into, I lived in Washington, D.C., where a lot of projects were approved because of off-site affordable housing where money was set aside for affordable housing somewhere else. And a lot of projects got approved later on in Washington, which is a much bigger city that probably shouldn't have been because they got money for affordable housing somewhere else. So I think we just need to look at that carefully before we start putting money into something like that. So I'm going to vote, with regret, I'm going to vote no on this.
So if I can make or are you going to make a comment? I was going to make a motion.
Councilmember
Go ahead.
He was before you, Councilmember Holstridge.
A comment, which is, the reason I brought up, and I'm fine with the sidewalk app, I guess I have some questions. One, the reason I brought up the affordable housing is my understanding, which might not be correct, was that was the Planning Commission's first choice, but they were told we didn't have a fund, when in fact we do have a housing fund with $1 million+ in it. So that, just so we can be clear, what was the Planning Commission's first choice on this?
I don't know if it was their first choice, but it was certainly one of the choices that they wanted to consider.
Got it.
And I was not aware that we had a fund in place, and so that was the direction that I gave them at that point in time. But again, that was one of the things that they considered, and one of the priorities for them, especially on this project and any projects going forward, is they would like to put funds towards affordable housing.
And I'm fine with this being for sidewalks. Do we know if in the $1.5 million were already allocated recently for sidewalks, and maybe Marcus knows this, is that area already addressed? Are there gaps that are not going to be addressed in the sidewalk projects that we're currently planning on doing that actually need to be done up there?
We actually just finished some. So on North Indian by Racket Club and San Rafael, we did do some. And there'll be some small pockets of sidewalk further south of Vistachino on Indian.
But is there a need for more money for right around that area?
There's always a need for money for sidewalks. So.
Okay, in that area specifically, though.
Yes.
So I'd want to make sure, because if we're going to do that, I would want to make sure it's really right there, because I do think it is a safety issue. I think that's a good point. My only thing on the noise, the belt and suspenders, which I just want to mention, is no subwoofers and a noise limiter that prevents the noise from going to a certain level. I would see trying that for 6 months before requiring a specialized, unique system that after the fact, I don't know how expensive those are. Have you priced that out? Can you let us?
Yes, just for the devices itself is about $16,000. That's not including install, monitoring it, upkeep, et cetera.
I would rather try the noise limiter, and in 6 months, if we're getting complaints and violations, then I'd make it a condition that the other gets added on, if that's not working. That would be my one recommendation.
So will you restate that if you want to
back off of the, which is this one called?
Noise monitoring system.
The permanent noise monitoring system, but take off the subwoofer and require a noise limiter that actually limits how loud the noise can go.
So what do you want to remove from that?
I want to remove the noise, the permanent noise monitoring system. Is that the right name for it?
That's correct.
But we'd still have the noise limiter that would prevent the sound from going above, and we get rid of the subwoofer. And in 6 months, if that's not working, then put in this specialized system, because once you buy it, it's unique. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to return it. And if there's problems before 6 months, bring it back to us.
I'd trade you that if we could monitor.
Yeah, I think getting a report to Planning Commission annually, I think, is a good idea. We might do that on all of our outdoor music venues, actually. So, okay.
I would support that too.
Okay.
How many years would we monitor? I'd like to monitor.
100.
100-year monitoring. Can you put that down? And Flynn, I need you to stay here to do that monitoring. Hope you weren't planning to go anywhere. What do we think of 5-year monitoring?
Yeah, and I know your report.
5-year report?
Report.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
good
fine.
with, okay, then I can go with, I can go with the back-off trial. But guys, we're going to be strict on that if we do that.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
I was going to state the motion out loud, but I think you clarified all the points, so I'll just.
I think, will someone state a full motion?
I'll make a motion to approve everything listed in the recommendations from the Planning Commission and contained in the staff report, except to only require the noise limiting system and not the noise monitoring system, and to add a yearly report to Planning Commission about the status of complaints about the project for 5 years.
And that report would include police reports as well. So Chief, I don't know if you feel comfortable with that. I know you're hiding over there somewhere. Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember that. Okay, good. Thank you.
And if I could just say, the level of staff work and preparation and all of your shepherding of this project through is just really impressive. And to allow us to sit here and grill you about the status of those specific sidewalks and to be able to answer is just incredibly impressive. So thank you for all your hard work on this. Made it easy for me, at least.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just clarify on the public benefit. The public benefit is to be the $50,000 amount to the sidewalk gap project instead of the $25,000 that the applicant was requesting.
Yes. If that's what Planning Commission said, I'm supporting that.
Okay.
Okay, motion approved made by Councilmember Holsage, seconded by Councilmember Coors. Motion is on the floor.
Motion passes 4-1 with Mayor Moon voting no.
Okay, no legislative items, no unfinished business, no new business. Public comment on non-agenda items. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the City Council on items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. Although the city values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. 2 minutes will be assigned to each speaker. Let me go to the different panel. We have one speaker, Mr. Alan Worthy. If we have any other speakers, please present a card at this time.
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'll put a demand on the city again shortly, and I think what it really is a default. As far as I can tell, Mr. Kotkin, the city is in default of the complaint that I filed against Officer Donovan against his offense on my person back in November. And I put that complaint in against the city shortly thereafter. I don't think anybody here doubts the stress, duress and angst and horror that my life has been in the past few years from the zero response from this city on either side of the street, okay? But if there is any doubt in your mind, then you can view the body cam of the second time that Officer Donovan pulled me over, and I'm speaking, Mr. Roberts, and Stop. I expect your undivided attention. View the body cam, Mr. Roberts, especially you. You'd view it at one of your cocktail parties and watch me melt down on him and the way he had treated me, okay? You seem to think that's okay? Well, I'll just treat you that way. Your attitude is obnoxious. It's my 2 minutes.
Mr. Worthy, it says and that you will stop your comments about city council members. You will stop it now. Mr. Worthy, stop.
You can correct him, Mr. Kotkin.
Okay.
Say any goddamn thing I want to say.
Out that the ordinance of the city for the procedures of meetings prohibits the criticism of staff or members of the city council in that manner.
Yeah, he needs to be taken out of the building.
Okay. So
needs to leave.
Okay, we have one more speaker, Charlene Ferris. Ms. Ferris.
Hi, Christy, Lisa, Jeff, JR, and Mr. Moon and staff. I'm Charlene Ferris, and I'm I'm here unprepared, and that shook me up a little bit.
Sorry about
But-
that.
Yeah, but I want to thank you all up there, and as well as the board of directors of the Palm City Animal Shelter for what you did to get my kitties back to me on Sunday. Craig Ewing, who used to be the city planner, who I have known since October the 2nd, 2012, when I moved here and I was under his classes for 4 years, he held my kitties hostage at the Palm Springs Animal Shelter for 9 days. He came to my house with Rusty Fukada, a technician or a vet tech, and I had a mandated reporter, a professional caregiver with Cambrian Health with me on purposely that day. And he literally tore my closet down, came in and took my kitties, and he held those 2 kitties who were my fosters, one I've had for 3 years and one I'd had for a year. Held them at the shelter with varying excuses that were not acceptable. And I had to take the measure of contacting Christy, thank you so much, and the rest, and she contacted the rest of you all. And he allowed my kitties to be released, but he put demands, he put unbelievable limitations on me, stating that I had to get a letter from my landlord, which if my landlord had complied, and thank God, the good Lord that he did not, but had he complied, he would have been in violation of a HUD and ADA as well as fair housing laws. And I went with Jeff King, one of my close friends, to get the kitties on. Is my time up?
Yes, Ms.
Okay.
Ferris.
All right.
Thank you very much
Anyway,
for coming.
thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, we have seeing no other speakers, we will close the last public comments portion. Next portion, City Council and City Manager request an upcoming agenda development. Anyone? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. So first of all, Mr. Kotkin, I have a question for you. So with Mr. Worthy, we have this ongoing problem, and I can deal with some of that, but I find that I can't really work under those conditions. More importantly, it really upsets me to see our audience intimidated and frightened by him. He's becoming more aggressive and more defiant. And I don't know what we are able to do on that, but he seems to be unfazed by our admonishments and our requests that he come in here with some level of respect and self-control. But him screaming at us like that and threatening us that way, that I can't work in this environment. And I need to know between you and our police staff what we can do about that, because he's not getting the point. It's every time now.
I will prepare
I find him threatening to us.
I apologize, I thought you were through. I will prepare a confidential and attorney-client privilege memorandums describing to the council and mayor. I will CC the police department what our capacity is to limit that type of behavior in this chamber. I certainly understand. You and I have spoken about this before, and I've expressed in this chamber that you all have the right and even the responsibility to do the people's business for which you were elected. And when things get in the way of that, that's not an acceptable impediment. People have a right to their government functioning in a reasonably ordered fashion. That said, of course, there's free speech. Of course, there's free expression. And in this city, as the 5 of you have made clear on many occasions, that's one of our paradigms that is unshakable, inflexible, and permanent as far as you're concerned. But there are limits, and I will provide that legal advice to you, not here in this chamber, but certainly in writing.
All right, thank you. I don't mind criticism. I don't mind people who are upset about issues. That's part of our job. And I don't even mind when they criticize us personally about issues having to do with the city. But he goes to another level of abuse, and I just can't deal with it. And it really upsets me to hear audience members shaken up from it. They come here to feel safe and to speak with us. They're nervous anyway coming here, and I understand that. We're all sensitive to that. Microphones aren't friendly. They shouldn't have to be subjected to that kind of behavior in here. Somehow we need to create a safe environment for people to be here and to speak with us and for us to relate and communicate with them. So I really think we now need to take some sort
You
of
need
an
some
action.
tools, I understand.
We need some real tools. He seems to take pleasure in this, in trying to intimidate us and the room and our staff. It just doesn't, we can't work under that. Putting that aside, and thank you. I'll look forward to your...
Mayor Pro Tem, can I add something to that?
Sure.
I'd like to add that I was just recently at the Palm Springs Opera Guild Black Tie Gala at the Palm Springs Art Museum, and Mr. Worthy was there in a tuxedo. The ticket started at $350, and he was there. He was having conversations with some of the most prominent members of our community, and behaving in a very social and very acceptable and very sophisticated way. So that tends to lead me to have very little sympathy for this, because I know he can behave in a civilized way because I've seen him do it. That's why I agree with Mayor Pro Tem that some of this may be an act, and if there's some way to, based on a history, a restraining order of some sort, there are limits to free speech.
Public spaces are subject to a lot more limitation with respect to things like restraining orders, but there are limits, and the people are entitled to have you all do their business in this chamber in an ordered, reasonably safe manner.
I've been bringing my procedure book with me but this hasn't happened for the last couple of meetings, so I didn't bring it tonight. But it does specifically say that this is not allowed, that people are not allowed to denigrate or insult staff or council members.
Well,
also, people are telling me that come to us that they're afraid to sit near him and they're afraid to be in the room with him.
I think we made
That's
our point,
really where my advice will be directed. I'm not comfortable giving you legal advice in this forum, but I will put it in writing. I will CC Chief Reyes. We'll have a dialogue in a confidential manner, and as a practical matter, I'm disturbed when I hear that somebody who's here from the public feels unsafe. I agree with you 100%.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to add for the record that City Attorney Kotkin and I met with Mr. Worthy approximately a month ago, heard him out for approximately an hour, and gave him an opportunity in a quiet forum for him to express all of his concerns. Then he came back and asked for a subsequent meeting, which I had last week with him.
Wow.
Lasting approximately 45 minutes. So he has been given ample opportunity to present to not only this council, but to me one-on-one, to say what his concerns were. He was invited, he was requested at the last meeting that I had with him, put down in writing all of your complaints, all of your concerns, and I will follow up on those and ensure that we do follow up. So I think this is a effort at getting attention, and it is simply inappropriate, and it is unnecessary because he has been met with.
Yes, I'd add, I've also had him in meetings in my office, extended meetings twice, and I've listened to all of his concerns. Okay, Councilmember Holstage?
Thank you. I was going to change the topic and make a
Please.
few requests.
I'd appreciate
Okay.
that. Thank you.
I will wait for the city attorney's written advice to us. Thank you for that. I would like to request an ad hoc subcommittee for our business retention committee and work. What Councilmember Coors and I are on the standing committee, and we're putting together a forum for the community, and so we need to meet and discuss that in a way that will help organize it, and we can't do that without an ad hoc subcommittee. Please, Mr. Mayor.
Could I just, in terms of the scope of the ad hoc's portfolio?
To plan
Not just this one, though, any future events through the first year, sort of an experiment for this standing subcommittee to do more aggressive work in the community, right? That's what you're looking for? So a full year of, is it just one event you want?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not clear on that. What is it?
We would like an ad hoc subcommittee for business retention to plan community forums
More than one. Thank you, more than one, through a year.
for a year. Does that work? Since our council brought it up, I would like to flag the noise ordinance for our review. The standards are difficult. I actually had an issue at my property where I bought sorry, my brain's tired after how many hours that we've been doing this straight. But I actually bought monitoring devices to check, and like just the ambient noise on my property is like 70 decibels because I live on Farrell. And so there were issues with us complying with the noise ordinance because even just the regular noise of the street and our neighbors is much, much higher than that, and it puts people at risk for complaints and other things like that. And I think we should really review that in light of our conversation about this property. Thank you.
Councilmember Middleton?
I hate to add anything to our upcoming agendas, but I would like to get a very short report on Fire Station number 4 and the progress being made on bringing that fire station back online.
I'm happy to give you an update right now.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm pleased to report, because we've been seeing contract prices going through the roof because the economy's booming. We had the bid opening on last Thursday. We had 4 competitive bids. The low bid was $3.9 million, and the higher bid was $4.6. So having 4 bids within that span for this type of project is a good thing. It means it was a very well put together project. The estimate was around $3.5 million, so it did exceed the budget. But I feared it could have been $5, $6, $7, $8 million, given the lack of contractors, given they're all busy. So it's a very good news story that will be coming to you at your April 4th council meeting.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, you had some more issues?
Thank you. Yeah, with respect to future agendas and so forth, Dr. Reddy, I'd like to request that at some point at your convenience, there's no urgency obviously on this, but I'd like to see it come back before summer if possible, the downtown furniture question. We've had sufficient time for everyone to go see it and comment on it. I'd like to bring it back to see what changes we want to make or what we like or don't like. Stacy has asked that as well. And obviously we don't want to, if we're going to do these change outs, we don't want to subject that to them if we can in the heat of the summer, particularly getting rid of all that concrete furniture. I also was hoping that we could soon talk about our summer schedule. We know that we have up until the summer, it looks like we're going to be adding a number of meetings to our agenda to cover the heavy caseload that we anticipate. But I'd like us to talk about August or July, August, and September about how we want to handle that. I don't know if that's something we want to go hit tonight or another time, but sooner than later.
Well, I was going to formally agendize that at the next meeting and send council out well in advance a suggested schedule.
I will, and I have some ideas on that, and I guess I'll just forward them to you too.
Because there are several additional dates we needed to work around as well.
Yeah, some that we know about already, and then as you're saying, you have additional on top of that.
Right. There's obviously holidays, Jewish holidays, Christmas holidays, and New Year's, and then the summer. So, and then some extra meetings that we're planning. So I'm going to put together a rather detailed upcoming schedule, just calendar. I'll get it to council. It'll actually be agendized at the next meeting, and I can get formal direction.
Okay, yeah, I was just talking about the summer, but if you want to do the whole thing, even better. And last but not least, I'd like us to have a discussion about our planning process. And, you know, we've talked in the past about some ideas for streamlining the process, potentially even combining the Planning Commission and the AAC, some other things. And we've just, as a new council, never really gotten to talk about our process, have a conversation with Flynn on ideas he might have, but just how it's all working and how we may adjust it if that will benefit our staff and, of course, the public. So if that could come up. in some gap in some upcoming agenda as just a discussion item.
Okay, and I'd point out that the January 2nd is a Wednesday, and that's probably the film festival. So we might, since January has 5 weeks, so we might be able to actually stagger that to the 2nd, 4th. Also, Dr. Reddy, if you, when you look at January, because I'm sure Harold will have the film festival on January 2nd. So.
They know already.
Okay, and the request was for a ad hoc committee on business retention for planning. Who wants to be on that? Councilmember Holstage and Councilmember Coors? Okay. Okay, anything else? Seeing no, Dr. Reddy, you have anything else? Dr. Reddy, anything else? Okay. Seeing nothing, we will adjourn this to the next regular meeting scheduled Wednesday, April the 4th at 6 o'clock in the Palm Springs City Council chamber. Thank you.